here in November's show, you called the general election. Not only called it, but called the right number as well. And I believe my words to you were, "You're insane."
Yes, I think they were, yes.
I didn't. Yeah, I thought you grossly overrated the success of the Conservative Party. But
you know, when the Dalai Lama dies and a new one is born, have we checked that Professor Curtis is still alive and well?
Yeah,
We've got
still
another one
alive.
here.
He's still alive. Yeah.
what can I ask? Why did you get it right? Do you think?
So the thing I noticed from 2017 was that in seats like Rother Valley, in Wokington, and of course in Bishop Auckland, seats like Blythe Valley, was that the Tory share of the vote actually had risen, even though they hadn't picked up the seats, whilst Labour's share hadn't had the same corresponding rise in seats like Canterbury, Kensington, that delivered those surprise gains for Jeremy Corbyn, which meant there were a whole swathe of seats that, whilst traditionally that had been Labour, were actually in fact marginals, and these were where Boris Johnson was targeting it with a strategy of retaining large chunks of the vote leave support there as well, combined with polling that was done throughout the campaign, which showed in the British elections, it doesn't really matter what the headline number is. You need to look at the gap between the two main parties, and the fact that Tory polling was consistent throughout the entire campaign suggested they were successfully retaining their support in these seats and picking up some slight defectors from Labour as well, which is something that John Curtis during the campaign said was happening. So the closer we got to polling day, the more likely it looked to happen. Even though I predicted it, it was still a shock for me when the exit poll dropped, because these are still seats that they picked up at the time. That for example, Bishop Auckland in the last 100 years has only been Tory for 4 years of that. So Boris Johnson enters this new year having successfully redrawn the political map. Irrespective of how successful my prediction was, it was still a shock to most people.
A reminder to you all that you can not only listen to us, but you can watch us, because we are being live streamed right now. You can go on to at our Twitter handle @Talk Radio and watch us live stream, and also take part in the conversation, take part in the questions that are being asked, and send us your responses. You can get in touch with the show, 0344 499 1000. That is the number that you need. Or you can tweet us your replies to Talk Radio on Twitter. I think we're also going to be up on Facebook and YouTube, so have a look there as well. Benedict, we talked, I certainly talked just before went onto the break, onto the Christmas break. Naomi Smith, the Best for Britain, was on the show just before we left, and she's written quite a lot of pieces. There was one in Private Eye, there was a couple in The Observer and The Guardian about how Best for Britain, who had done possibly some of the most extensive research, the MRP research and all that stuff, they warned both the Liberal Democrats and Labour of a heavy defeat. Back in October, Best for Britain had that data. They approached the Liberal Democrats and they said, do not fall into the traps of going into an early election. You will get crushed. Reports came back that the Lib Dems replied with nonsense. Look at how well we've done in the European elections. We're going to get more than 100 MPs. Then Naomi went with Best for Britain to, Labour. It was pretty much the same response. You know, the youth quake was going to turn out for Jeremy Corbyn. Look at what happened in 2017. All of her warnings went unheeded. Rather than picking on, on that aspect, do you think that both Labour and the Lib Dems, had they listened to the data from Best for Britain, was there anything they could have done to stop Boris Johnson?
I mean, it's difficult without going, I suppose, into individual seats and looking at where, had there been some sort of an agreement between the two parties where votes could have changed hands, in which case, had enough votes gone either way, then potentially, yes, we could have found ourselves with a hung parliament. But I think the problem is, we don't want to spend too long looking at this in hindsight, because it has already happened. The
Yeah.
thing is going to be now going forward and see where you rectified those mistakes. And I think the key thing really is the messaging from the Liberal Democrats just wasn't strong enough. I mean, to just go in on a single issue like Brexit was always going to be damaging, seeing as their argument was simply to revoke and remain, whereas the Conservative Party had, the juggernaut going forward. They had the deal, they had the option. That's always a much more positive message than the Lib Dems, which, even if you are a Remainer, simply saying, oh no, we're going to go back, we're going to revoke, that's a negative way of looking at it, and it doesn't quite strike you in the same way as, say, Jeremy Corbyn, who came out with all sorts of policies across the board. He had something for everybody. The big issue is really who the candidate was himself. Actually, people didn't really get on board with the idea of Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, we've heard Jess Phillips talking already about certain policies were just sort of taken as cloud cuckoo land policies, like broadband across the country, completely paid for by the taxpayer. But the key thing was, actually, where Labour went wrong was the leader. And they have an opportunity now, right now, to rectify that mistake and then spend the next 5 years trying to undo all of the toxicity and the mistakes of the past 4 years.
We're going to get onto that because, of course, we're going to dedicate quite a lot of time on the Labour leadership contest that is happening at the moment. We're also asking the question to our listeners. We're asking the question of who do you think, what does Labour need to do now? Who do you think the next Labour leader should be? What qualities should they have? What sort of leader does Labour need? Call us 0344 499 1000 is the number you need to let us know your thoughts, or you can tweet us at Talk Radio, as many of you have already, and I will be getting to your tweets as soon as possible. Mike, finally, I don't want to harp on about that and harp on about the past of what could have gone differently, but in a sense, you need to understand what could have been possible, what mistakes were made. We'll talk about the Conservatives and what they did right as well in a moment. But do you think any sort of deal, any sort of Remain alliance, but a proper one, where Joe Swinson and Jeremy Corbyn could have united together for this one election and presented a united front, would that have made any difference whatsoever? Or do you think the Conservative message, the simplicity of it, of get Brexit done, that mantra that we get, as disastrous as Strong and Stable was in 2017 for Theresa May, get Brexit done seemed to have hit the nail on the head for the country?
I don't think a Remain alliance would have made much difference in this election, and you simply have to look at the fact that although the Lib Dems put on 1 million votes in the election, and I don't think we can talk enough about this election actually, because it will define the next 10 years of British politics. Labour have to win 132 seats to get a majority of 1 in 2024. Wow. Whenever the next election is. So sorry if that's depressing you on a Sunday morning. But one of the things to remember is that it's all really about geography, and the kind of seats that were winnable in this election were the kind of seats that traditionally formed the basis of Labour's time in power. And you can make a lot of the fact that Joe Swinson didn't want to work with Jeremy Corbyn, but Benedict's right. The main reason that many Labour voters switched off from the party at this election was not the party's position on Brexit. YouGov did some polling on this after the event. It was by an overwhelming majority, almost by two times more. It was the leadership. And this is why the next Labour leader could, in my opinion, I wrote a blog about this yesterday, go down as one of the party's greatest. We're looking for a Neil Kinnock-esque figure here who has to get in, clear out some of the fact, decrease momentum's influence, stabilise the ship, make some solid gains, but they're not going to be the next Labour Prime Minister here. But harking back to the fact that their Brexit policy, as Labour have done, saying it wasn't clear enough, when I've been saying the same for the last 3 years, it didn't really harm them at this election. They couldn't have run on an ambiguous Remain platform and kept the same votes. The Tory message was simply too clear and too coherent.
Very quickly, I think it's a good point that Mike makes, which is that the next leader has a lot of ground to cover up and they could be remembered as a very successful one. But the key thing there being that they're not going to be the next Labour Prime Minister. But what we need to remember is that right now Labour has 3 very competent, very capable individuals, former frontline politicians who are currently mayors of major metropolitan areas. We're talking Dan Jarvis in Sheffield, we're talking Andy Burnham in the Manchester metropolitan area, and of course Sadiq Khan in London. all three of them are Labour mayors at a time when this Conservative government is talking about increasing the amount of funding and devolution and powers that is given to regions. Those three stand to make a lot of headway if the Conservatives actually follow up on their promises of taking those resources and using them in a pro-Labour manner. If they do good jobs in that sense and then come back after the next general election, I don't see any reason why one of those three couldn't potentially be a Prime Minister of this country if the next Labour leader is able to regain the ground that's been lost. I think that's an interesting thing to look at going forward. Of course, it's 5 years plus in the future, but those three are people to watch, certainly.
Okay, well, we are going to get into the nitty-gritty of the next Labour leader. Who do you think it should be? What do you think Labour need to do? Who should they be looking for? We've had, so far announced, we've had Clive Lewis, we've had Emily Thornberry, Lisa Nandy, Jess Phillips, have I missed Keir Starmer, and have I missed anybody else? Rebecca Long-Bailey hasn't declared yet.
Has Ian Lavery declared?
No.
We'll hear it when he does.
We'll hear it when he does. Angela Rayner is now thought to be
on a joint ticket with Rebecca
Long-Bailey. Not Wrong Daily.
Richard Burgess,
Long-Bailey.
Long-Bailey.
She's taking her time.
We will get into the nitty-gritty of that, and plenty of your messages coming through. Of course, I also want to talk about the Conservatives and what they will be doing in office. We are going to be speaking later on the show to Sir Bernard Jenkin, Conservative MP. But the Conservative Party manifesto was deliberately short. It's definitely shorter. It was put together with one motto, which was, if in doubt, leave it out, which was the exact opposite of the 2017 Conservative manifesto, which got them into so much hot water. However, there are things in there. I mean, it would be unfair and unkind to say that there's just nothing in there. But do we know enough, Benedict, of what kind of government is going to take over? Be that the Conservative narrative at the moment has been just overrun by Brexit and the Brexit negotiations. Do we know what kind of Prime Minister Boris Johnson is going to end up being?
No. And I think the thing is, in 3 months, around about 3 months, there will be a reshuffle in the cabinet, and that will be the time to actually, spell out what this kind of government is going to be, because there is going to be something of a power struggle within Number 10 for actually what direction we go in. Is it going to be going for the old style sort of Tory government, or are we going for the Dominic Cummings style wrecking ball, absolutely, reforming everything, pouring money into things that most Tories would, absolutely be horrified at the idea of spending excess amounts of money? And we've got 3 months now, roughly, as to when that reshuffle will take place. And that is when we will know who has won and what direction we're going to be going in, I think. Up until that point, I mean, I think there will be increases in spending. As I've said, there will be much more spending in the regions, because as much as anything else, the Conservative Party now has a dog in the fight. It has a reason to spend money in areas that it has just won. And as Boris Johnson referred to them, they've borrowed them. They've taken them from Labour, but not permanently. They need to win them permanently. So they will have to address key issues. And there are things that need to be addressed anyway, everything from the NHS to social care. These are things that, one way or another, a government is going to have to deal with. So we should expect to see those things on the agenda, but more broadly, we wait and see as to what kind of government it's going to be.
We will be discussing that, and we're also going to be discussing this sort of the internal battle of Number 10 after what seemed to be the strangest job application sort of advert put out by Dominic Cummings on his personal website. Well, I do want to talk about that. But Mike, it seems like, I mean, you've sort of stunned us by the, just putting a pure fact out there that Labour need to win, what is it, 132 seats in order to have a majority of one. Which is an incredible feat to have to overcome, especially with what's going on with Scotland as well, which we're going to talk about later in the show as well. But whether that's doable or not, we will come to later as well. But as Benedict said there, with Boris Johnson saying that he has borrowed these votes from Labour, doesn't the Conservative government and Boris Johnson in particular at the moment have a golden opportunity? Because as Benedict said, that Labour wall that's sort of partially crumbled, if Boris Johnson comes good on his word of spending, I think they've put aside, is it 97 billion? Some extraordinary figure to spend up there. And if he does spend it, we're looking at Boris Johnson staying in power for at least a decade, if not more.
Barring any sort of personal calamity, I think, for Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson.
So we give him 18 months at best.
I think Benedict's right about the Tory party's tendency. I did a history programme last year about the Tory party, and looking at that sort of essential pragmatism of it as well. There will be a tendency for them to revert to the sort of the Shire Toryism as well. The people that want grammar schools to be reopened is a good example here. The Tory party is going to stay in power for the next 10 years. They have to become the party of public services, particularly the NHS. And we saw that in the Queen's speech with the funding settlement that was put on the books as part of that. What worries me about going into the next 4 years is that Tory manifesto has largely been implemented in this first Queen's speech. There isn't an ideological basis. We're not talking 1979 here when Thatcherism had monetarism and a clear sense of ideology behind it. This Tory government's far more populist. It will pick up policies probably from Labour, although not free broadband, it's fair to say, that things will be successful. But investment in public service is going to be trickier for this parliament because of the tax lock commitment in that manifesto. And Philip Hammond came unstuck by this in 2017 when he tried to raise national insurance on self-employed people, which means where's this money going to come from? More borrowing. And we're going to go through a period of probably some degree of economic uncertainty, irrespective of whatever form of Brexit we have. We can't change our major trading relationship without some form of short-term disruption, I would say. So paying for that is going to become more and more difficult. And there's a question of how much money they want to put into it as well. But if the government is smart about what it invests in, I'm thinking here about long-term infrastructure investment, particularly improving east-west transport connectivity, for example, railway lines from Liverpool to Hull, which would be very popular. That's how the government wins votes and makes good on that investment with probably limited financial rules.
OK, we have to take a quick break. Plenty to talk about, as you can see. We've got reams of your messages. The answer to our question of what sort of leader does Labour need, we will be spending a lot of time on that. A reminder that you can watch us live streamed on Twitter and on Facebook right now. Call us, 0344 499 1000 is the number you need. You could tweet us at Talk Radio. Next up, we'll be speaking to Sir Bernard Jenkins.
We are
Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Radio listener, yes you. Using artificial intelligence and kryptonite algorithms, you have been selected with 66 million other people in the UK to receive hundreds of deals in the Carphone Warehouse sale. Like this one. Get the first 3 months half price on selected pay monthly phone contracts. Or get 50% extra data on selected SIM-only deals. T's and C's apply. Offer available on ID Mobile only until January 14, 2020. Select contracts only. Visit website for details. If you are not hearing this, then you have not been selected for the amazing sale at Carphone Warehouse.
At Bath Store, enjoy up to half price on selected bathroom products. Bath Store. Feels so different. Exclusions at bathstore.com.
At McDonald's, we're always working to give you choice in your Happy Meal. Like when we made it possible to swap out fries for a veg or fruit bag. Or when we introduced grilled chicken as another wrap option. And now, we're launching the new Veggie Dippers. Perfect for dipping in our tomato ketchup. These are just a few of the ways we're always working on our Happy Meal. Served after 11 a.m. Participating restaurants only.
Think differently about travel in 2020 with Times Expert Traveller and make incredible savings from today. Redefine what a holiday means to you with unique itineraries, handpicked by travel specialists from the Times and the Sunday Times. Discover Uzbekistan and the secrets of the Silk Road, or take a once-in-a-lifetime voyage to Antarctica. Be inspired and save on some of our best-loved experiences. Visit thetimes.co.uk/expert traveller. Out of the ordinary, in the know.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
The M32 remains closed in Bristol between Junction 1 for Hanbrook and Junction 2 for Eastville for accident investigation work. There is a diversion in place. In Wrexham at Horseman's Green, the A525 remains closed between Pear Tree Lane and the A539 following an accident this morning. At Ancoat in Greater Manchester, Rochdale Road remains closed because of a serious accident between Gould Street and Thompson Street. And in Cheshire at Upton, the A5116 Liverpool Road is closed because of an accident. I'm Michael Page.
At Costa, we know New Year's resolutions are easier said than done. Like going to the gym every day. Well, some days. Or saving money. Until there's January sales. And how about going dairy-free? Well, actually, that's pretty easy, since our delicious almond, coconut and soya dairy alternatives are now free. At last, New Year's resolutions you can stick to. Visit your local Costa Coffee and discover what's new in store. T's and C's apply.
Outspoken opinions and decisive debate. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show. You're listening to Talk Politics with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with the Times. Be well informed. With me, I have Mike Indian, political blogger and commentator for the Groucho tendency, and Benedict Spence, freelance journalist and Tory commentator. And I'm very delighted to say that we're joined on the line by Sir Bernard Jenkin, a Conservative MP for Harwich and North Essex. Welcome back to the show, Sir Bernard.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you as well. Well, I think last time we spoke, it'd be fair to say it was all a big mess. No one even knew when or if we were leaving the EU, but I can safely say now that with a majority of 80, it looks likely that on the 31st of January we will be officially out of the EU. A struggle that you've been fighting for quite a few decades. You must be thrilled.
Well, I'm pleased that the British people have sort of ratified their own decision in this general election result, that they voted to leave in 2016, and they voted for a government that is going to implement leave. And I think what's important here is we don't do direct democracy very well in this country. It doesn't sit comfortably in our system of representative democracy. But the direct mandate to leave has now been turned into a proper representative mandate. And that sits much more comfortably in our constitution. And it's settled it, hasn't it?
Well, it seems to have settled it. I would argue that the phrase "get Brexit done," which was very, very successful and did its job in the general election, was a tiny bit misleading in the fact that many people thought that would be the end of Brexit. But of course, that it's not really, because the negotiations start, and they've only got an 11-month period, a period that Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, has said might be too short in order to get that deal done with the EU. And also,
there's an irony in this, isn't it? We spent the first 2 years negotiating with the EU when they say the clock is ticking, you've got to get on with it, blah, blah, blah. And we said, they were setting the deadlines. Now we've set the deadline and they don't like it.
I don't think it's a question of liking the deadline. I think it's a sort of a realistic. Every single trade expert out there says that 11 months is not really enough time to do a comprehensive deal. And my question to you, Sir Bernard, is you've won the battle, as you said earlier, and the people have even ratified that choice. So they have backed leaving the EU. What does it matter to you if it takes 11 months or if we need a slight extension? We're going. Don't you want to see us go in a nice, orderly fashion?
We're leaving on the 31st of January. That's when we're leaving the EU. We then become a sovereign state.
Of course.
There are some elements of the single market that will be continued beyond that date to provide time to negotiate a trade deal. Now, unless the EU wants to be obstructive, it is very easy for us to do a trade deal, because most discussions about trade deals are about misalignment of regulatory systems. And we start this negotiation with our regulatory system 100% aligned with the EU system. So there are no conflicts of interests between our system and their system. There's a whole lot of argument that usually takes place in a trade deal that makes it protracted. I mean, why hasn't the EU done a trade deal with the United States? It's because they can't agree about regulatory systems.
Sure, but Sir Bernard, correct me if I'm wrong, because I've been struggling to understand this argument, which has been made over and over again when people question the amount of time that it will take for the UK and the EU to do this deal. And everybody keeps saying, but we're already aligned. But I thought the whole point of Brexit was that we don't want to be aligned. I thought the whole point of Brexit is that in order for us to go and get our own deals and perhaps do a deal with the US, is that we want to disalign ourselves from the EU.
No. The whole point about Brexit is to take back control of our own laws. And a conventional trade deal is not done by setting up a court that decides that, in one jurisdiction, that imposes its will on the other jurisdiction. Now, that's where the sticking point is going to be. It's going to be about politics. If there's a sticking point, it's not about the trade. It's about the politics.
Okay,
And,
so
if
does it matter to you, Sir
the EU
Bernard,
is
if
going
it takes a little bit longer than the end of 2020?
Well, I expect that we will conclude some kind of trade deal.
I see.
At the end of 2020, it may not be a fully comprehensive trade deal. That may take many more years.
Okay.
But our trading relationships are going to be constantly evolving and constantly changing. New industries are coming into being, which require whole new fields of regulation. I mean, how are you going to regulate artificial intelligence when artificial intelligence is probably going to become an important element of a great many products and services? And there's no regulation for that. But we will be, in that respect, creating our own regulatory system, or perhaps in conjunction with other countries like the United States, which may be different from the EU. We will not be subject to a majority vote for them to impose their regulatory system on us.
There's been a report today in the Sunday Times that there's a bit of a rift happening in Number 10 already about the way these deals should be done. Particularly, it's reported that some parts of the Cabinet feel that the UK should begin parallel talks with the US as a way of putting pressure on the EU. How do you feel about that? Do you really think that now that you've achieved, as I said, your purpose, don't you think that the softly does it approach is going to get us a better result?
Well, do you think the EU is going to play softball with us? I mean, come on.
I don't see why. I don't see why they wouldn't. It's in their interest to get a good deal with us as much as it is for us.
Yes, of course it is. It should be.
So why are you trying to paint them as someone who's not going to give us a good...
I'm not trying to paint them as anything.
Right.
I'm just saying that they will play hardball with us, we'll play hardball with them, we will play hardball with the Americans, and the Americans will play hardball with us. That is in the nature of trade negotiations. And now that when we become a sovereign state on the 31st of
We've always been a sovereign state, Sir Bernard. I mean, I think there's a little bit disingenuous to say that we haven't been a sovereign state.
Well, the only in one respect have we been a sovereign state is that we've always had the right to leave the European Union. But so long as we were in the European Union, we were not sovereign. We were not in control of our own laws. We had to pay taxes to the European Union over which Parliament had no control because they were controlled by the European Union, subject to the European Court of Justice. Now,
I think you'll find that the amount of laws that the European Union interfered with that we passed, you should know this more than I do, are minuscule.
No, that's not true at all. There's a vast statute book applying to the regulatory system and the economic system which we were being subject to. And people voted to take back control of our own laws. Look, let's not rerun the referendum.
No, let's not. Here's a question. Here's a question for you. Your Prime Minister stood up the day after the election and rather humbly, I thought, admitted to the fact that the Conservative government was returned due to a borrowing of Labour votes, particularly up on the Labour wall. We saw constituencies such as Blythe Valley turn blue for the first time in their history, and an acknowledgement by Boris Johnson that these votes were lent to him and the Conservative Party. In order to keep these votes, as we've been discussing on this show, the Conservative Party really does need to spend money and improve the lives of the constituencies up in that Labour wall. And in order to do that, money needs to be spent. Now, in your manifesto, you've had that lock on all forms of tax raising, the lock on VAT raise, the lock on income tax. How are you going to spend this extraordinary amount of money that you need to spend in order to hold on to those votes when you've said that you're not going to raise any taxes? You're going to have to borrow that money, aren't you?
Well, I've been looking with interest at some of the commentary around how the Treasury rules work, and which decides where money is spent. That's one aspect. Another aspect is, I mean, I don't know if HS2 is still going to be a vast absorber of public funds, or whether we will be diverting that money to different and perhaps quicker win projects. And projects, I mean, I've always been a bit of a skeptic of HS2 because there are going to be so many innovations in road transport. As road transport becomes carbon neutral or carbon free, road transport will become much more acceptable, and perhaps our roads will be carrying much higher capacity traffic controlled by self-driving vehicles and things like that will make trains look rather out of date. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of questions I think we need to look at with an open mind. But the other thing to remember is, At the moment, all governments, a great many governments, have been doing this quantitative easing in order to try and maintain the supply of money to the economy and to stop because these interest rates are extraordinarily low. This is a very good time for the government to borrow to invest in infrastructure, and it's borrowing to spend on revenue, borrowing for consumption. That is damaging, but borrowing to invest in infrastructure, I think I've got much more open mind about.
But hang on a minute. That's what you, as the Conservative Party, have been castigating the Labour Party for years. The Labour Party, in your eyes, has always been the party that borrows. The Labour Party was going to borrow a lot of money to invest, and now you're turning around after you've won the election saying, oh, well, guess what? We're going to do the same thing.
Well, I'm wrong, I'm afraid. I mean, the Labour Party was going to spend £58 billion on reversing a decision on the reform of the sex equalisation of pensions.
Well, they felt that was a moral issue. These women, and quite a lot of people agree on them on that. They felt that was a wrong that needed to be righted, and it just needed to be paid for.
If I can just finish the point, that was the point about that spending commitment. It wasn't borrowing to invest. It was borrowing to increase consumption. It was borrowing to increase the living standards of pensioners. Well, however rich or poor they were, most of that money would have gone to better off pensioners, by the way, which was a very inefficient decision. But the point is, borrowing to invest in infrastructure is a different kettle of fish. And while it's so cheap for governments to borrow money, I mean, for example, we shouldn't be using private sector money to invest in power stations, for example. I think we should be using government money, government bonds to do that. Why are we off balance sheet financing and pretending that's not government borrowing when we could borrow more cheaply on the government's balance sheet? So that's why my committee recommended an end to PFI, and the government's now ended PFI because it's a very expensive way of borrowing money. Pretending it's not a liability on the taxpayer.
Sir Bernard, a quick question from me before I hand over for a question from one of our guests as well. But yep. I have to ask you about the current situation with Iran. We are meant to have this special relationship between the UK and the US. It sounds like the US didn't even inform the UK about its actions that it took last Friday with the killing of Mr. Soleimani. It's not putting the Prime Minister in a very good position. A lot of people have criticised the Prime Minister because he's been largely absent. I think he's returning today. He's been silent. Mike Pompeo has said that the Europeans, including the Brits, hadn't been as helpful as I wish that they could be. We're starting to see a bit of a souring of this relationship.
Well, there's always been tension in this so-called special relationship. I've never believed that it is inherently special unless both sides are prepared to make it special. I remember Ronald Reagan invading Grenada, which was a member of the British Commonwealth with the Queen as head of state, without consulting Margaret Thatcher. So, this is nothing new. We've got to remember we are a major global power, but we're not a superpower, and the United States is entitled to protect its own interests and its own citizens and its own armed forces in the way it thinks best. And if the United States had done a great deal of international consultation, it may have compromised the mission that it wanted to accomplish. I agree with the Secretary of State for Defence that the United States is entitled to act in this way in self-defence. I'm also pleased that the government has responded by increasing force protection and the protection of British shipping in the Gulf, because I'm quite certain that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard will be trying to retaliate in some way, and they'll be looking for soft targets, civilian targets, and targets in their own region, first and foremost, like they did with HMS Cornwall, like they did with other attacks on shipping. So we've got to remain vigilant. What makes our military relationship special with the United States is the extraordinary way we are integrated with training and development of weapon systems and doctrine. I mean, our nuclear deterrent is intertwined with the Americans. We actually verify their continuous at sea nuclear deterrent. We check their readiness at sea. We train their submariners. Isn't that extraordinary? That's how equal this relationship is.
Well, equal up until the point where they decide to take such huge action without letting us know. Mike Indian...
and we retook the Falkland Islands against their wishes.
OK. Mike Indian's got a question. question for you, Sir Bernard. Mike?
Good morning, Sir Bernard. I had a quick question regarding Dominic Cummings' blog post last week on civil service reform. How is it appropriate for the Prime Minister's most senior advisor to effectively be allowed a platform to set out a manifesto for wide-ranging reform of Whitehall when he has very little in terms of oversight from Parliament, especially your committee, which covers civil service reform?
Well, he's entitled to act in any way that the Prime Minister considers fit, and I hope that many of the things that the shortcomings that Dominic Cummings has described in his blog of the civil service, which many of us have been talking about for many years, will be addressed. The one caveat I would add is that the civil service wants to address these problems itself and would like ministerial support in order to do that. I don't think the civil service can reform itself. It requires ministers to lead the reform of civil service and the improvement of the civil service. But it would be a great mistake for the government to pick on the civil service and demonise the civil service as the problem. Ministers are responsible for policy. Ministers are responsible for the state of the civil service. Ministers shouldn't pick on their officials, otherwise they really will lose their cooperation.
Sir Bernard, we've taken up a lot of your time. Thank you so much for giving us your time this Sunday morning. I really appreciate it. That's Sir Bernard Jenkins, Conservative MP for Harwich and North Essex. A reminder, you can still watch us live streamed on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. You can take part and call in the show, 0344 499 1000, the number you need to speak to myself, Benedict and Mike. And, of course, you can tweet us. You can tweet us at Talk Radio. We're asking the question, what sort of leader does Labour need? But after the break, we're going to stick with Sir Bernard Jenkins' thoughts there, and also coming back to Dominic Cummings and his blog.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
What's better than being at one with nature? How about being at two with nature? Get a 2-for-1 companion voucher valid for 2 years when you spend £10,000 each year on the British Airways American Express Premium Plus card. Probably best not to go for the silent retreat then. Search VA Amex to find out more. Representative 76% APR variable. Annual fee applies. Applicants must be 18 years or older. Subject to approval. Terms, taxes, fees and carrier charges apply.
Start the 2020s in style with the Sunday Times. Nigella Lawson on the joy of turning 60. Chris Evans, Bill Bryson and star chef Tom Kerridge on their life lessons for a happy new decade. Plus, get a free book, 10 to Zen, only in the Sunday Times this weekend. T's and C's apply.
Take 346.
Delight the family with an Old El Paso smoky barbecue fajita or cheesy baked enchilada kit for just £1.85 each.
You started clapping again. Let's try it again. Take 347.
Co-op, it's what we do.
Was £3.70, now £1.85. Serves 4, subject to availability. Participating stores. Offer ends 4th of February.
This morning on Happy Days, get a free McMuffin.
Proper tidy. Pink.
Pure class.
That is canny, that is.
Happy Days, a deal a day until the 26th of Jan. Just download the My McDonald's app to join in. One free McMuffin, 16 plus. T's and C's apply. Today only between 5 a.m. and 11 a.m. Participating restaurants only.
Nice legs, Barry. What are you doing in shorts? It's January.
Mate, haven't you heard?
Britain, Halls from £9.50 is back. Pick up your copy of The Sun and start collecting today. Oh, yeah. Terms and conditions apply. Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
In Bristol, the M32 remains closed both ways between Junction 1 for Hambrook and Junction 2 for Eastville for the ongoing accident investigation work, and to the north of Bristol on the M5 northbound between Junction 15 for the M4 at the Elmersbury interchange and Junction 14 for Thornbury. It's looking very slow. The M25 anti-clockwise between Junction 9 for Leatherhead and Junction 8 for Reigate has a lane 1 closure for emergency repairs, and on the trains, Avanti, West Coast, Cross Country, Transport for Wales all have no services running at the moment between Birmingham New Street and Birmingham International. I'm Michael Page.
At Costa, we know New Year's resolutions are easier said than done. Like going to the gym every day. Well, some days. Or saving money. Until those January sales. And how about going dairy-free? Well, actually, that's pretty easy, since our delicious almond, coconut and soya dairy alternatives are now free. At last, New Year's resolutions you can stick to. Visit your local Costa Coffee and discover what's new in store. T's and C's apply.
Talk Radio. Outspoken opinions and decisive debate. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show. You're listening to Talk Politics here on Talk Radio with the Times. Be well informed. With me I have Mike Indian and Benedict Spence, and we just heard from Sir Bernard Jenkin. I'm not quite sure about the answer to where the money's going to come from. It seemed like Sir Bernard Jenkin was saying that perhaps the scrapping of HS2 because trains might become obsolete.
That's 50 to 70 billion max, maybe. I mean, if a project, maybe 100 billion. It's still. I mean, the Tories have already pledged more than that in the manifesto in terms of new spending.
Yeah.
So for the NHS.
I don't think that's going to be enough. Also, I read a particularly good article. I've been trying to get him on the show, but I tweeted, if you look through my tweety things, I might retweet it, but John Stone from The Independent wrote a particularly good article actually explaining HS2 in a way that I've never heard it explained before, and how actually it could be hugely beneficial. And it's not just about getting people to Birmingham 12 minutes faster. It actually has to do with freeing up lines. I mean, he explains it in a really basic term of if you have one line, then you can only run X number of fast trains, X number of slow trains. If you have two lines, it means you can increase capacity on the slow line. And actually, it's not. Actually, HS2 is not really about the HS2 lines, actually about all the other lines. They get freed up.
It's about capacity and resilience on the network, and I spent a good chunk of time following the HS2 bill through Parliament, and capacity is one issue, but also resilience. And I think we have to look at the fact that effectively the HS1 line is able to keep operating through flooding, and yet the older Victorian parts of the network are consistently affected by bad weather as well. So we do need new infrastructure. As I said earlier, it's east-west connectivity is more important, I think. But building HS2 will allow more resilient connections to be built around it too. I think anything the government do should be in addition to HS2, not at the expense
But at the moment, I think HS2 has been hoisted up as this sort of, look at this incredible waste of money. Why don't we take that money and spend it up north? And, and I think it's slightly
in the north.
misleading.
Well, is Birmingham the north? It would be wrong of me to comment on that article not having read it. So I would be very interested to read it before, revising my position on HS2. But it has always struck me as it is as much a political issue because it connects London to somewhere. Whereas actually, a lot of the resentment is nothing to do with London. It's connecting, as you say, Liverpool to Hull, or Manchester to places like Bradford, or bringing places like Peterborough or Norwich, into the 21st century in terms of their connections to the rest of the network. I think that's more the issue. It's less so much that it's a massive waste of money on something that's only going to shave X amount of time off the journey. That's not the issue. It is that it is serving London specifically. I think that's where a lot of the resentment comes from. You're right, we should be upgrading the whole of the rail network because much of it is not fit for purpose. I think what people dislike about HS2 is that it seems to prioritise London, whereas they prefer to see a similar system put in place elsewhere. If we're serious about the Northern Powerhouse, which who even knows what that means anymore, but do you see what I mean? Why are we talking about putting more money into the regions when ultimately it just seems to serve London? I think that's the political position that people have an issue with.
Let's have a chat about the Dominic Cummings issue, which, Mike, I thought you were very violent. Valiantly, not violantly.
I don't do anything violently.
What have you done to Sir Bernard Jenkin?
Valiantly raised with Sir Bernard Jenkin. Now, Dominic Cummings, on his blog post, dominiccummings.com, he put out basically what is a job advertisement. I'll put my cards on the table and say that, I think if I just read that without knowing that it was Dominic Cummings writing it, I'd have a different view of it. And I'm just admitting to, my personal biases. I think that some of what he's saying is actually quite interesting and needed. There was a book, he was a guest on my show yesterday. James Ball's written a book called Bluffocracy. I think it's a very, very interesting insight into, the type of people that we get in the civil service and in politics. The theory behind it is you are getting people who go to university, whether it's Oxford or Cambridge or one of those big universities, take a PPE, philosophy, politics and economics degree, and actually get trained whilst they're at university to bluff it. There's this sort of the essay panic. They get taught and get a degree in how to cram as much information very, very quickly, be able to spit it back out for when they need it, but actually hardly any of it is actually of any substance and makes up the character of the people. Now, this is a huge generalisation, I accept it, but does Dominic Cummings have a point here when he's saying, look, we need people outside this PPE bubble. We need people who are, I think he uses language which he knows people are just going to pick on and get upset about. They're looking for data scientists and software developers, fine. Economists, fine. Policy experts, good. Project managers, fine. Junior researchers, one of whom will also be my personal assistant, okay. But then weirdos and misfits with odd skills.
Well, I must say, I felt particularly sorry for Qasem Soleimani, who just on the very day that Dominic Cummings starts advertising for evil genius types, he gets assassinated by the US. Well, awful timing.
Awful timing. But does he have a point in the fact that actually if you want to change things, if you really want to change things, which I believe that perhaps maybe the rest of the Conservative Party may want to go back into business as usual. But I do believe that Dominic Cummings is in there to change things and change the system. Now, whether you agree with the changes or not, let's put that aside. But if you want to change stuff, you've got to start thinking about involving people who are not necessarily career civil servants, career politicians, you want people like a Malcolm Gladwell, people like Jonathan Levitt, the people who wrote Freakonomics, people who are experts outside politics, people who are experts in social engineering, behavioural economics, people who have different solutions to the same problems.
Unique thinking in any organisation is always welcome. I know a lot of civil servants, a lot of my friends work in the civil service, and they are all bright, talented, unique people, but they can argue that when they go in, they do not become experts in areas, and I know a lot of them, the churn that Dominic Cummings has talked about does happen, particularly given the fact that pay at the civil service is being capped. This is a political consequence here of the government's 1% pay cap. A lot of civil servants have moved to different grades to get pay rises too, so that the government's essentially, effectively the churn is a result of a political decision taken by the Cameron government nearly 10 years ago now. For me, I think we have to be careful about the fact, and this goes back to the lesson from Kim Darroch here, for example, in the summer, that we are very fortunate in this country to have a largely impartial, independent administrative body advising the government. And I think the civil service, to me, has never been the main brake on key reforms here. They are willing to work with ministers of any particular shade and colour. We saw it with the coalition, we saw it with the Labour government from 1997 to 2010, and we've seen it with three very different Conservative prime ministers here. The civil service has been behind them all the way. Can the organisation be reformed? Absolutely, and I think now is the time to bring more people in because it's growing for the first time in a decade. But we shouldn't buy into the full scepticism that Dominic Cummings has of the civil service, because ultimately we're still going to have to rely on them to keep this government's policies into action.
It's ironic. He has that scepticism because he has seen in his time of being a special advisor to Michael Gove in the Education Department, he has seen civil servants who are not particularly good at their job just be rewarded by being transferred to another department and carrying on
and that is a problem, yeah.
And that is a problem. However, one would, point to, Chris Grayling, Matt Hancock, both having offices in...
I think Amber Rudd and Windrush is a good example of this, where the civil servants were just transferred. I do have this sort of the weirdos comment. I think there is room for that. There are political appointees. Ministers are allowed to have special advisors. Who knows? Think Steve Hilton. Steve Hilton had a lot of these same ideas now. Now Steve Hilton's on Fox News talking up Donald Trump now. Now make of that what you will in terms of the weirdos label. But there is still room for ministers to have independent thinkers around them.
There's a couple of things. I think the use of the word sceptic in relation to Dominic Cummings is very important. I don't think there are many things that he isn't sceptical about. That is his sort of modus operandi. And I think it's also worth pointing out that until very recently, and I'm still not even sure that he is a member of the Conservative Party, he's not a natural Tory. And it would be, perhaps one way of looking at this would be that he has used it as a vehicle to be in a position where he can change the civil service. Now, when it comes to the issue of major civil service reform, it's interesting. We were talking about earlier, I think before we came on air, about the love of the British we have for sort of the upper classes. But we also have another love, and that's for people who we would consider to be eccentrics. We're very indulgent of people who are very eccentric, and we like to idolise them, perhaps to our own wider detriment. And I would say that I do personally think, I agree with Mike, I think that the civil service has many good people, it functions rather well, but it does need reform, and there is always scope for people to come out from outside of an organisation which is perhaps a little too set in its ways, a little too set in its own ways of thinking. I think that's one of the major problems that the civil service has. There's always scope for people to come from outside with different expertise, especially, as we say, we're entering an age now where actually the civil service is not necessarily equipped to deal with things like cyber warfare, AI, in quite the way we would like it to be, and that could be sped up. But what we shouldn't do is fall into the trap that I think a lot of political commentators have done on both sides about Dominic Cummings himself, which is to assume an element of maverick genius and therefore rectitude just because somebody acts and thinks in a slightly different way. I think it's very interesting about Cummings specifically that both people on the left and the right, Remainers and Leavers, have painted him as a sort of a guru, either evil or brilliant,
but also incompetent.
Either way.
So some people believe he's hugely incompetent and also contradicts himself majorly because
that is true. But he has, in the last few years, got himself onto. Not right in terms of you agree with it, but he's been on the winning side.
Absolutely.
So certainly, there is something there in what he sees that perhaps other people are missing. Yeah. But it would be wrong, therefore, certainly for the Prime Minister, to give him carte blanche to just do whatever he wants.
Is a certain there's a lot of ironies, and actually when you read this job advertisement, there are a lot of contradictions inside it as well. One of the ironies, which we didn't get time to get to with Sir Bernard Jenkins, is this whole idea that for ages we were told about these unelected bureaucrats in the EU, which we can't vote out, and they make all the decisions, and how can you hold them accountable? Well, here's one right in Downing Street right now who is proposing to shake up the whole system. Nobody voted for Dominic Cummings. He's not a minister. There's not a way. If Boris Johnson decides that Dominic Cummings is not going anywhere, you can't vote him out. Do you think, Benedict, knowing the Conservative Party as you do, is Dominic Cummings going to be allowed and tolerated to make all these changes?
There will be major pushback against this. I mean, as we've already seen in the Times, people are already leaking. We've had anonymous sources talking about him pulling the pin out of a grenade and throwing it into the bunker just to see what happens. It's very clear that a lot of people are very concerned about what he does, as much as anything for their own careers. They can see that somebody like him coming in and potentially shaking things up could be very detrimental to the way their own personal careers go. So it's understandable, I think, that there would be a lot of pushback. But the thing is, and I think we think in terms of where Cummings has come from, his running the Leave campaign, running an element of the Leave campaign. I think what we make the mistake of doing is thinking that was all about Brussels, that the vote to leave the European Union was just entirely a vote about leaving the European Union. It's not. It's part of a wider pushback against this culture of, I wouldn't say unelected, I'd say unaccountable people. But the ordinary voters feel that they don't have as much of a say, not because they can't vote out their MP, but that they feel ultimately, again, we talk about civil servants being moved around, that MPs aren't the ones with the power, and therefore that's the system that needs to be changed. And therefore, I think probably Dominic Cummings, nobody voted for him, but I think the Conservative Party itself should be very wary about trying to usher him out, because the Conservative Party has got has got a majority now on the back of getting Brexit done. But what is Brexit a vote for? Not just about leaving the European Union. It is about change. It is about reform. If you were to sideline the people who, whatever way you look at it, these are now the people in the media at the forefront who are supposedly spearheading this project. If you were to try to shift them out, it would be wrong to think that there would be no repercussions for that at the ballot box next time if people felt we were just going back to business as usual.
Well, if you are a super talented weirdo, as Dominic Cummings has puts it, then feel free to drop him a line. I will give you, he's put his email out there that you, I can't find it right now. That's very annoying. But anyway, you can find this piece online if you Google Dominic Cummings. I think it's a sort of Dominic Cummings post, and he gives you instructions as to how to mark your email. well. I mean, it's a very... Oh, there we go. Ideas for number 10 at gmail.com. Put in the subject line, the job.
Address, okay.
Yeah. So Google will be able to read all these applications as they read all Gmail.
That's probably where he's trying to get the weirdos from, the people at Google sneaking on his emails.
But then again, he sort of says if you play Office Politics, you'll be discovered and immediately binned. It's quite a frank sort of job advert out there. But there's one bit where he lets the whole thing down. It's the penultimate paragraph. He says... we do not care about trying to control the narrative and all that new Labour junk, and this government will not be run by comms grid. And that's exactly how this government... That's exactly how this government has been run so far. Right, we've used up all our first hour on the Conservatives. In the second hour, after the 11 o'clock news, we'll be looking at Labour. And boy, so many of you have replied to our question, what sort of leader does Labour need? I will be getting through to your tweets and your messages on Facebook and YouTube, where you can continue to watch us being live streamed. Do pick up the phone, 0344 499 1000 is the number you need. Let us know your thoughts on what Labour leader needs to be sought for Labour in order to win back those 132 seats in order to get a majority of one. Dear me. 11 o'clock news next.
This is
Talk Radio.
The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
The deadline for filing your tax return is creeping closer, so it's time to do something about it. Make life easier with EY Tax Chat. Download the app today and connect with EY professionals to file your tax return with minimal effort and maximum confidence. There's no paper documents or complicated software. EY tax professionals prepare and submit your return from just £329. Search or download EY Tax Chat now to beat the 31st of January deadline.
Chris and Grace discussed New Year's resolutions. Grace wanted more time in nature. Chris wanted more family time. So they compromised and adopted a family of badgers. Don't compromise. With our tasty new plant-based range at Asda from £1.50, you won't have to. Asda. Save money, live better. Selected stores subject to availability.
This is not a cat. This is not a rocket. And this is not a sale. That's right. At Smarty Mobile, we're not having a sale. While others are slashing prices, we're introducing our best ever new plans. Take our new 30-gig data SIM for just £10 a month. With unlimited calls and texts and no speed restrictions, credit checks or contract tying you down, why shop around? New plans, great value. Now that's Smarty. Grab yours today. Search Smarty Mobile. See smarty.co.uk for terms.
Listen up, it's the head teacher here. Please pay attention. We need you all to collect as many Books for Schools tokens and the Sun as possible. When we've got 3,500, the school will get over £600 worth of free books. If you don't, it's detention. Start collecting Books for Schools tokens and the Sun today. T's and C's apply.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
We are
Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio on the Hour News headlines.
I'm James Lower. Good morning. Donald Trump says the US has 52 Iranian targets in its sights and will not hesitate to take action if the country retaliates over the death of a top military general. 2 Royal Navy vessels are being deployed to protect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz because of rising tension. It's a strategically important route for transporting oil. Elsewhere, it's hoped better weather conditions will help emergency crews battling wildfires that are still raging across parts of Australia. 24 people are now known to have died after a 47-year-old man lost his life while trying to defend a friend's home in New South Wales. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has called the situation unprecedented.
Plenty of people have blamed me, people have blamed the Greens, people have blamed, who knows. Honestly, blame doesn't help anybody at this time.
He was criticised for taking a holiday in the middle of the crisis, whilst the Queen says she's deeply saddened by the bushfires. A man in his 20s is in hospital after being stabbed in Leicester city centre. Police were called just before 10:30 last night. Armed officers are on the scene and a 21-year-old man has been arrested. The cost of the High Speed 2 rail project is being described as out of control. It could rise to £107 billion, according to the former deputy chair of the government's independent review into HS2, Lord Berkeley. People campaigning against it say it's a waste of public money, but the leader of Manchester City Council, Sir Richard Leese, says it must go ahead.
It needs to be built in full, and it needs to be built alongside Northern Powerhouse Rail. This is not a choice of either or. The north of England needs to be better connected with the rest of the country, as well as being better connected across the north.
The Department for Transport says Lord Berkeley's assessment is his personal view. And Dancing on Ice will make history later with the show's first same-sex pairing. Step star Ian H. Watkins is competing with professional skater Matt Evers. A total of 12 celebrities are taking to the rink for the new series, which returns to ITV tonight. So weather then, much of the UK staying dry and cloudy, some brighter spells for East Wales, the Midlands and eastern Scotland, and a bit of rain in northern Scotland.
Talk Radio Sports Update.
England have made a good start on the third morning of the second test against South Africa. They lead the hosts by 98 at lunch. South Africa were bowled out for 223 before that. Ball-by-ball coverage continues on TalkSport 2. Elsewhere, it's Liverpool against Everton in the FA Cup third round today. The match at Anfield is one of 11 games in the Cup this afternoon. And Sheffield United will change their entire starting 11 for their match. Their manager Chris Wilder says he's taken the decision after back-to-back Premier League games with Manchester City and Liverpool.
Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio.
Talk Politics with Alexis Conran on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on the Talk Radio. You're listening to Talk Politics. With the Times, be well informed. With me, I have Mike Indian and Benedict Spence. And we have been talking about the Conservatives for the full first hour. I think it's time to give them a little bit of a break. And now to come to the Labour Party. And, of course, the Labour Party now are in the midst of choosing their new leader. We've been asking the question of what sort of leader does Labour need? And surprise, surprise, many of you have an opinion on this, which have let us know watching our live stream on Facebook, on YouTube and on Twitter, which you can continue to do so. Continue sending in your messages at Talk Radio, and also give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number that you need. So we've got Cornell on Twitter, a non-Remainer for a start. OK, well, that's a good point to start. So the new Labour leader, is it important which side of the debate they were, or do you think the fact that Brexit's kind of done now?
Let's be honest, I think they're better moving beyond the Remainer or Leaver labels now. I think, you look at Craig Oliver's article over Christmas. Mm-hmm. He said it's time to move past that particular debate. Keir Starmer was on Andrew Marr this morning. He said the same thing. What they will be hounded by, I think, are their past associations and pronouncements on this. Most of the candidates in the race so far, I think nearly all of them have been very vocally in support of Remain and pro-second referendum. But apart
from Lisa Nandy,
saying that they've moved past, that would be a sign of maturity, and recognising that the Conservatives' election victory, I think, has settled the question of whether we're leaving the EU or not, rather than rerunning past arguments.
Another one, Sandra on Twitter says, an honest one. I think you could say that about a lot of politicians. I think... Could you have levelled that criticism? Because we've got to look at it in the context of Labour. Jeremy Corbyn, could you have levelled dishonesty?
Well, I was going to say, actually, he was honest about a lot of things. I think
to
his detriment.
I think that's what got him into trouble,
yes.
wasn't it?
Well, I suppose the argument would be, well, be honest, but perhaps don't have such quite contentious views or such contentious history with certain organisations, I think would be the answer to that. But I think certainly honesty can get you so far, but certainly it doesn't help if you're already not a very good candidate. Being honest about that doesn't help you.
I think if authenticity comes into this election as well, I might very well scream, because what we want is someone of ability to lead the Labour Party at the moment as well. And Jeremy Corbyn was honest about many things, including his silence on things like, pro-Remain stance. When most of the party was, he clearly didn't agree with that direction, particularly for a second referendum. What we need is a leader who I think could put a lot of their own personal convictions aside. This is where I think, someone like, we're talking about Kinnock here, even arguably Michael Foot, who was able to work with Dennis Healey, don't forget, in 80 to 83, when they had very diametrically opposing views about the Labour Party should be. because what Labour leaves out right now is a unifying figure of somebody who has the ability to make Boris Johnson uncomfortable in Parliament, because the only scrutiny he's going to get, really, apart from occasional media interviews, is going to be from PMQs and someone who can really apply forensic examination of him and his policies at the dispatch box.
A few more messages. I'm not going to read the name. Some people's Twitter handles are... I'm not quite sure about reading this out loud.
Russian
but anyway,
bot 121.
But, well, no, it's worse than that. Okay. This one says they need to get rid of momentum and look outside of the London bubble. They took seats up north for granted and paid the price. Momentum are not going anywhere, are they?
Come back.
What Stalin needs to do is get rid of the Politburo, then it will be fine.
Alan Johnson said on election night, and seeing him this angry, I think, shows how far this issue has got inside Labour now, because he's a very mild-mannered man. It's the fact that Momentum is a party within a party, let's be honest, but Momentum represents the mainstream of thought now. Then it's not militant in the 80s now with a few councils. They represent, I think, a lot of the views of a large chunk of Labour members and the Labour operation and people around Jeremy Corbyn, because don't forget his key advisors are on contracts. They're going to inherit a fundamentally different party to the one Jeremy Corbyn picked up in 2015. You can't get rid of Momentum. What you need to do, I think, is to either fully assimilate the organisation and say either you get behind me as Labour members or you go off and form your own organisation, because we're now in the post-Corbyn era. Now, you can't undo everything Corbyn's done, and I don't think you should do, because the party that's happened to the democratic processes of the party, even if it has yielded 3 election defeats now, in some form or another, so 2, I should say, on Corbyn's watch. Now...
Well, if you include the European election and the local elections.
It hasn't yielded electoral success for Labour, let's be honest about that. But you can't get rid of Momentum, but you need to...
Can I ask you both, what did you make, because I've been away, obviously, but what did you make of the Jeremy Corbyn's article the day after the election, or a couple of we lost the election, but we won the argument? I mean, that infuriated me, and I think quite a lot of voters, whether they were on either side. How can you say we've lost the election but we won the argument?
Because ultimately I think they remain in control of the Labour Party itself, and that's what is important to them.
It's always been the goal.
Yeah,
of this
I think so. In that sense, he's completely right. He's not actually talking to the country. He's talking to his own supporters, for whom they will never lose the argument. And the key thing is they remain in control of the Labour Party, and whoever becomes the next Labour leader will not be from the Blairite wing of the party. They will have to be, even if they are somebody who is not naturally inclined that way, they will have to pivot further to the left.
Who is the Blairite wing of the party?
There isn't a Blairite wing of the Labour Party. Well, they've been very successful at expunging this element. I think Tom Watson's departure even expunged the last key Brownite figures.
I think Stephen Kinnock could be called a Blairite, couldn't he?
Yeah, he's got that sort of background. I'd say he's more on the soft left of the Labour Party now. There's like Liz Kendall and people like that in there. Winning the argument for them, I think,
Yvette Cooper?
Yvette Cooper's more of a Brownite figure, but I would say that...
I think those are all the same thing to the people on the far left, though. That's the
anyone
thing.
Other than
it does get very Monty Python, Judean people's front of Judea, but that's the nature of politics on the left in this country, and it always has been the case. But I think the thing is, this goes to the heart of it, is that this leadership campaign, every candidate will be picked over, as you said, everything, all their positions in the past. It's about ideological purity for so many people, certainly in Momentum. And the thing that they have to remember is, and it was John Rentoul that said this after the election, is as much as they paint Tony Blair as a sort of an antichrist figure, he was able to achieve for the poor, for the underrepresented, he was able to achieve more in 4 hours than Corbyn has in 4 years because he won a general election. And that's the thing that Labour has to get over. It doesn't matter how good your credentials, how pure you are a saint. If you don't actually get into the business of saving people, then your sanctity is completely worthless.
Let's listen. Quite a lot of hopefuls, Labour leadership hopefuls, have been doing the rounds this morning on BBC's Andrew Marr and also on Sky's Sophie Ridge. We're going to hear from Sir Keir Starmer, Jess Phillips and Lisa Nandy. Have a listen to this.
All have to take responsibility for this. It's a devastating result for the Labour Party, for Labour MPs, really good MPs who have not been returned, candidates who should have been Labour MPs, but for the millions of people who desperately needed change at that general election. They still need that change, and they're not now going to get it. So it's devastating. It's beyond sorry, it's devastating.
Trust was the issue, not the radicalism, not the deep and fundamental change that we were promising, but trust. It says in our constitution, Labour seeks the trust of the people to govern, and people didn't trust us.
We have to go back to the basics. My son doesn't go to school 5 days a week. And while that is the case, and lots of people in the country, they can give you their own example, they can't get social care for their parents. While that is the case, offering people free broadband was just not believable. And we have got to be able to connect with people.
There are the three. That's Sir Keir Starmer, Jess Phillips, Lisa Nandy on Andrew Marr on the BBC, and Sophie Ridge, Sky News. Martin on YouTube says Lisa Nandy for me, as she's the only acceptable face of Labour, and I'm next door in her St Helens. The last thing we need is a smug-faced Thornbury or Starmer from London.
I think let's look at what Jess Phillips had to say about the free broadband policy here, because this highlights how the 2019 manifesto is going to be an albatross around the neck of whoever follows Jeremy Corbyn. And I think what Benedict was saying about the ideological purity of the Corbynites is entirely correct, because that manifesto had so much in it. There were a lot of good policies in it, but it did go too far. And it's interesting that Jess Phillips didn't feel she could row back on the 68 billion for the WASPy women as a good example of that as well. There's going to be more of a battle over ideas than whoever leads the Labour Party here. But let's be honest here. The Labour Party has a lot of ground to make up. It doesn't really matter what they believe now. They have to effectively hold the Tories to account on the issues of trade deals and how we leave the
but
EU
what do you think
months.
of this? What Martin, I think, is referring to here on YouTube is this idea that we've heard it before, that the next Labour leader has to be from the north, because that's where the problem is. That's where the Labour wall collapsed. They don't want, as he puts it, a smug-faced Thornbury or Starmer from London. Now, before we came on air, we also all observed that none of the shadow front bench are from the north, those parts. So is that a point? Does it make a difference?
Let's say, hypothetically, Ian Lavery throws his hat into the ring to be leader. Does anybody actually think that Ian Lavery would make a massive improvement on Jeremy Corbyn?
He's made noises about standing, but let's put Lisa Nandy, because Lisa Nandy we know is standing, and she's got a case. And also, Jess Phillips, Yardley, local MP. Is it important that the next Labour leader is from outside London, the metropolitan elite bubble?
Do you know, I went back and forth. Before Christmas, I would have said yes. Now I am really not so sure it makes a difference. Having seen the professionalism of Keir Starmer's launch, I think it has to be down to the ability of the candidate. And it would be supremely ironic if, going to this election, the Labour membership chose another man to lead the party, but the fact is, if there isn't a female candidate,
it just has to be the right person.
Well, that's exactly the thing. It's another thing about ideological purity, box ticking. So, do they come from this background? Do they come from that background? If anything, these are just more hurdles to potentially disqualify a really good candidate. It's not the way to look at it. And, I mean, it speaks volumes that before she lost her seat, the great hope for the Corbynites was going to be Laura Pidcock. Does anybody actually think that she would have made a good candidate? No, but she ticked all of the ideological boxes, and that's the thing that they have to get over.
Those boxes now, you get Rebecca Long-Bailey, who I think has had a meteoric rise, but is not the right person to lead the Labour Party at this particular time.
But also, I think, how can you really back the idea that the next Labour leader has to be from up north or has to be a woman when you've seen things like Ronnie Campbell's seat, Blythe Valley, go blue for the first time in history, and you have people going out and voting for someone like Boris Johnson? It seemed to not stand in the way. Okay, maybe a lot of people will say, well, that's the combination of not wanting to vote for Jeremy Corbyn and the Get Brexit Done ideology. But I think that is evidence that people will vote for who they think will make the most competent Prime Minister, regardless of whether they are a man or a woman or where they come from.
We have to be honest about the Labour... the battle of ideas that Labour has had in the last 5 years particularly has seen large chunks of quite broad-based, sensible vote-winning policies that even under Ed Miliband's leadership were common, such as the energy price cap that, don't forget, the Tories appropriated, sacrificed on the altar of sort of professional, intellectual, middle-class socialism. And the big spending pledges from the 2017 manifesto were tuition fees, which, scrapping as disproportionately benefits the middle classes, and, of course, free broadband. I mean, I don't know of many people who in this country who wake up in the morning, if they're in deep poverty, and think, dear God, I need free fibre broadband to help me. They don't even have able to afford a computer. And this is the problem. The manifesto is going to represent, I think, the fact that Labour now is winning in the cities, but not in the areas where it used to
What
win.
both Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips said on BBC's Andrew Marr this morning was the issue of trust. They felt that Labour voters could not trust Labour to deliver on that massive manifesto that was bulging with promises. It was a thing that both those candidates brought up. Keir Starmer thought that the Brexit position should have been stronger, and he argued for it. Interestingly enough, he didn't commit to which way. I think we all know which way he would have preferred for it to be stronger. And he kept coming back to saying that Labour didn't knock back the Get Brexit Done motto. But I kept thinking, how could they knock it back? I mean, what can you say against the phrase of Get Brexit Done? It seems almost bulletproof. I mean,
I think the thing is now, it is no longer, it might sound a little flippant to say, but this is actually no longer Labour's problem to deal with. This is now the Conservatives' baby. They've got the next 5 years, and they will carry the can for whatever happens. And I think Labour has to get over that, frankly, and realise that actually they are going to be inheriting the situation after Brexit, if anything. They need to look for the future, and they need to have their positions on issues on everything else other than Brexit, because ultimately Brexit is something that you can negotiate, because you can very easily, as a Remainer, say, well, I was for Remain, and now I think that we are going to leave, and that's my position, and we hope that Boris Johnson gets the good deal, and we will put him under pressure on that. But, ultimately, as we are saying, it's going to be not the next general election that Labour wins, it's going to be in 10 years' time, as things currently stand, and you need to play the long game. You need to be completely assured on your position for the next 10 years, and that means on pretty much everything else. And it's, ultimately, I think Labour should look at this then as an opportunity. They're no longer going to be held to quite the same standard as the Tories are on their Brexit positions, as long as they are honest now about where they're going and they're not flip-flopping on it. I think actually this is a massive weight off their shoulders.
Do you think that what Mike was saying earlier is the key, though, right now, because of the Conservative majority being so large, the opposition is largely there to sort of not heckle from the sides, but you don't get that many opportunities. There's not going to be meaningful votes. There's not going to be huge bits of will they, won't they, are they going to back this, are they not going to back this. There's going to be the PMQs, certain media opportunities, of course what happens with an extension, if there is an extension, all these kind of things. But is Mike right that what you need more than anything else is someone who can be forensic, on detail? It was all very cute and very good when Jeremy Corbyn started his first PMQs with, Mary from Christchurch says, that was all very good. But actually, when things got very specific, Corbyn was not very good at absolute detail, forensic detail. And we have seen evidence of people like Sir Keir Starmer, even Emily Thornberry, I would say as well, be very, very good on detail. Is that what they need? Or, as Benedict's saying, is what's more important is forget about the Tories for now. They've got a majority. Let's regroup. Do they need maybe a Jess Phillips type character who may have the powers of bringing people together on both sides of the spectrum? She is a very successful MP in a Leave constituency who's always advocated for Remain, and she seems to have won the trust of her constituents over and over again. I mean, that shows that she can sort of bring people together and heal division.
I think for me, they need an experienced figure who is someone who's quite prepared to acknowledge they're not going to be the next Labour Prime Minister. Maybe not publicly, but at least behind the scenes. And I think the only person in the race who I think has those credentials is Yvette Cooper, if she decides to run at the moment. Because she has a select committee chair, the grasp of detail. Hilary Benn would be a good choice, actually. Somebody who, a lot of people have respect for his conduct during
Hasn't made any noises about running.
Exactly, but the point is that there's a lot of people in this leadership race who are running, wanting to be the next Labour Prime Minister. Keir Starmer clearly wants to be, Lisa Nandy clearly wants to be, Jess Phillips clearly wants to be.
Well, you would, though, wouldn't you? Would you? I don't think you could set out your stall saying, I want to be the next leader of the Labour Party. I'm not going to be Prime Minister, obviously, because I'm not going to make it that far. But, hey, I just want to take over for a bit. I mean, that's not a great sell.
I think there needs to be a little more honesty, though, about the size of the job in hand. I don't think there's anything. I don't think that they should come out and say, yes, I'm not going to be Prime Minister. But what they should be making clear is this is not going to be an easy 5 or 10 years. And that actually what you need is somebody who is prepared to, as it were, almost put their own prime ministerial ambitions to one side to say, actually, that's not what I'm going for. I'm going to make us electable again. I'm not saying I'm going to win. We're going to be electable again. That's what we need to fix.
OK. We're going to be hearing after the break from Geraint Davis, Labour MP for Swansea West. I'm sure we can ask him directly who he would like to see as the next Labour leader. But keep your thoughts coming in. You can watch us live on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. You can call the show 0344 499 1000 is the number you need. Or you can tweet us at Talk Radio.
This is
Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
People's Postcode Lottery costs £10 a month and £30,000 will be won every single day by players in the February draws. That's £30,000 for every player in the winning postcode. Join in at postcodelottery.co.uk before midnight on the 23rd of January to play in the February draws. PPL manage lotteries on behalf of good causes. 16 plus conditions apply. Play responsibly.
Someone's knocking at the door. Somebody's ringing the bell.
We've got something to tell you about the Honda Jazz. We know it looks small, but inside, it's really big. That's why we've created the small but big Jazz event, where you can get 0% APR representative and 5 years complimentary servicing on all grades until the 31st of January. The Honda Jazz, the small car with the big offer. Visit your local dealer to find out more. Honda dealers are credit brokers, not lenders. Finance provided by Honda Finance Europe, authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, it's me again, the TV. Since my family gave me Now TV, there's no more endlessly searching for something they want to watch, because now I don't do filler TV, just killer TV. If my family want movies, I've got blockbusters. Football, how about the Premier League? Or crime dramas, I've got loads. And they're never going to guess who did it. Now they can watch whatever they're in the mood for.
What's your TV got for you tonight? Now TV. 18 plus, month passes auto-renew, terms apply.
Start the 2020s in style with the Sunday Times. Nigella Lawson on the joy of turning 60. Chris Evans, Bill Bryson and star chef Tom Kerridge on their life lessons for a happy new decade. Plus, get a free book, 10 to Zen, only in the Sunday Times this weekend. T's and C's apply.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
Because of the ongoing accidents investigation work, the M32 remains closed in Bristol between Junction 1 for Hambrook and Junction 2 for Eastville. A diversion's in place. The M4 eastbound in Berkshire between Junction 10 for Wokingham and Junction 8-9 for Maidenhead. There's a broken down car blocking lane 1. And on the M25 anti-clockwise between Junction 9 for Leatherhead and Junction 8 for Reigate, lane 1's closed for emergency repairs. On the trains of anti-West Coast, Transport for Wales, Cross Country, all still have no service between Birmingham New Street and Birmingham International. I'm Michael Page.
At Costa, we know New Year's resolutions are easier said than done. Like going to the gym every day. Well, some days. Or saving money. Until those January sales. And how about going dairy-free? Well, actually, that's pretty easy, since our delicious almond, coconut and soya dairy alternatives are now free. At last, New Year's resolutions you can stick to. Visit your local Costa Coffee and discover what's new in store. T's and C's apply.
Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with The Times. Know your times. With me, I have Mike, Indian political blogger and commentator from the Groucho tendency, and Benedict Spence, freelance journalist and Tory commentator. Really need to get my teeth in. I think this Christmas break has really put me out completely. I am delighted to say we're also joined on the line by Geraint Davis, Labour MP for Swansea West. Welcome back to the show, Geraint.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, and congratulations for getting re-elected in your constituency of Swansea West. We have been talking about, of course, the oncoming Labour leadership election. Quite a few candidates setting out their stalls. We've got Clive Lewis, Emily Thornberry, Lisa Nandy, Jess Phillips, Sir Keir Starmer. Plenty more to come, I think. Do you foresee more people joining the race?
Well, it's difficult to say at this stage. There may still be some people considering their positions. And obviously that we've seen the early starters and we need to get things sorted by March. So I think it's still an open field.
Do you think that... I mean, how important is it to get someone in there as quickly as possible? We know that the NEC are going to be meeting tomorrow, I believe. I've heard some rumours going around that it might be as late as Easter. I don't quite know when Easter falls, but it feels like now is a very, very important time. Boris Johnson coming back in. I'm going to ask you about Iran in a second as well. We need somebody across the dispatch box who really is able to stand up as the unified Labour leader and hold this government to account, albeit a government with an 80-strong majority. Is this taking a little bit too long?
Well, I don't know about that. It's a difficult debate. I mean, obviously, Boris Johnson will probably be sticking there until 2024. And, our objective should be to win the next election. And winning the next election means winning another 124 seats.
I think it's 132, according to Mike Indian here, for you to get a majority of one. It's a lot of seats. Let's not argue about the numbers. It's a lot of seats.
Sorry, we need to get 325 in total, don't we? So we've got 203 at the moment.
Right.
So I think that makes 124. But I mean, basically it's a big number to get. Yeah. So it's not enough to. The difficulty we've got, I guess, is obviously we need a leader to unite the party and take unity in opposition against this government. But that isn't really enough. What we to be credible, we need to be credible with the electorate to win the next election.
And do you think?
I think there is a case for having a proper debate about what we really want and need and who that person is, rather than rushing to get someone to the front post to challenge Boris Johnson. But obviously, we don't want to leave that situation vacant. Jeremy Corbyn, in the meantime, is obviously doing his job.
What do you think, because we were arguing in the break, right, what's more important for Labour right now? Is it to put the best candidate opposite Boris Johnson? Because to be fair, this is going to be a completely different parliament to the parliament that we've seen since the 2017 election. We're not going to have those teetering on the edge votes. We're not going to have those standing order 24 opportunities. This is you're basically a more traditional opposition where you get a chance once a week at Prime Minister's Questions Times to hold the government to account. So should Labour be thinking who is the best candidate to put opposite Boris Johnson, or should Labour be thinking who is the best candidate to bring Labour back together again? Because it's important to say, looking at the messages that I've been having since we've been having this conversation on air, a lot of people are talking about the role of momentum within the party. How can you have a candidate that brings the Corbynite element with the people who feel that Corbynism was tried and failed and therefore the party needs to do something different? Which do you think is more important, a candidate that unites the party or a candidate that's effective opposition to Boris Johnson?
Well, ultimately, the Labour Party is nothing without power, and so we've lost 4 elections. If we lose another one, obviously we'll have another sort of bout of 18 years of Conservative government, and the people who suffer are the communities you represent, because we've seen, obviously, growing poverty and inequality, homelessness and food banks, etc., etc., and the economy itself is in awful state where we've doubled the debt and we're sort of stagnation. So we do need, to be preaching the language of opportunity and growth and green revolution, and we do need to unite the party. But the problem is those people who are completely preoccupied by arguing amongst ourselves miss the real point that we've become an irrelevance talking ourselves about. What's the perfect vision of a perfect society we want, rather than gaining power and basically protecting our communities and moving people forward. So it's a difficult question, but I think what we should be doing is clearly setting out our values and keeping the government to account. Clearly, our job in opposition is critically important, therefore, in terms of answering your question, is it the party or in Parliament? I mean, the eyes of the nation are on Parliament and what's happening, and what we're actually seeing now, we'll see the unfolding of Brexit, which, in my view, will make us, weaker and more weaker and poorer and more isolated and impotent internationally. We'll see that, and we need to identify and focus in on whether Boris Johnson will get the best deal for Britain, which Obviously, he won't. He just wants to have his oven-ready deal sort of pushed through. But more worrying, if you like, is that the Britain has been held up as, the cradle of democracy, and our fundamental values of democracy, human rights, and rule of law are under attack. We already saw Boris Johnson obviously suspend Parliament, overturned by the Supreme Court. He's now vowed to basically clip the wings of the Supreme Court in looking at attacking the judiciary. The civil service is under attack from Dominic Cummings, and the BBC is being starved. It's already, quite biased in terms of its reporting. So our fundamental values of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, which are protected actually in Europe by the Court of Justice, are now vulnerable to attack. And coming back to your question, a leader needs to be looking at these, the demise of some of the institutions that uphold our liberal democracy, as well as the impacts on our economy of this sort of absurd Brexit we're moving.
Sure, but as you said, a leader can't really do anything about that unless they're in power. So let's get back to...
I'm just saying they should set out their stall.
Sure.
And what I would say, I don't mean to criticise anyone here, but what I've just said, it isn't a stall that's been set out by any leadership candidate. They're preoccupied with talking about uniting the parties, and we can understand that because that's the immediate electorate. But we need a broader vision for the country and confidence and credibility that we can, for example, fund a step change in our economy and transform it into a sustainable basis rather than sort of hobbling along with diesel cars.
What are your thoughts on some of the arguments coming out? We've certainly had a lot of messages this morning when we've been asking what sort of leader should Labour appoint, but quite a lot of people are being quite adamant that it should be a woman and also it should be somebody from outside of London. How important is that to you?
Well, I mean, it would be good to see a woman, and we've got more women MPs than men for the first time in the Labour Party. And I'd like to see a woman, other things being equal, but other things aren't equal. And we need the best person to do the best job to, provide hope and opportunity for our communities and to win the election and to bring the government to account. As regards north-south, I don't think it really makes a difference where people geographically are from. My own view, in terms of there seems to be a presumption that the reason we lost many seats in the north was because we were too pro-Remain, and I've got to say I think that's a completely absurd view, and we should have pointed out from the start that Brexit would make us poorer, weaker, and more isolated, and basically said yes, we'll give you a vote on a credible deal, but we're pro-Remain. And that's the position of the Labour Party in Wales as it happens, and my personal position. But what happened in practice was Labour people would go to voters, and if they were Brexit, they'd say, well, you're not real Brexit, we'll have oven-ready Brexit. And if they were Remain, they'd say, well, you're not really Remain, we'll go to, we'll split and we'll go off with the Liberals. So basically, Boris Johnson divided the Remain vote. He got the election he craved. He won handsomely. But when you look at the numbers, 16.5 million people voted for Remain parties and 14.5 million for non-Remain, for Leave parties. So basically, the election is, yes, there should be a Tory government, but no, this isn't a mandate for Brexit at all, but now it'll be rammed through. And obviously the people on my side, the Labour side, have basically said, what can you do? We better just let it happen. And of course, we haven't got the votes to stop it happening, so it will happen. But these things will come back, and we need a leader who knows and has got his eye or her eye on the ball. So as we approach 2024 and the wheels are falling off the car and a majority of the nation still wants to live in the EU, we should be fighting for greater alignment to stay with our friends, in particular at a time when we face increasing threats from abroad, not least, Donald Trump running around killing people because to distract from his impeachment and to help him in his forthcoming presidential election. I mean,
well, we were going to come to that in a second, but just to pick on the point that you made before. So, are you saying that there is a chance that Labour would be running on a 2024 general election campaign as what a party to rejoin the EU?
No, well, I'm giving you my personal view that I don't believe that when the dust settles and the true impacts of Brexit emerge as we approach 2024, I think people will sort of think, hold on, we should have never left. And most
sure, but it would be too late.
And I think at that point,
it would be too late by then, though, because we'd be out.
Will take a view on what they should do. Now, that view might be we should, in terms of the trading relationships, we should, reconsolidate our alignments with the European Union. And it may be that people say, well, okay, well, there may be a door to actually rejoin because we're stronger inside than out. Okay. Yes, of course, that should be part of the debate, and that is the view I take, yeah.
OK, lastly, before I hand over to Mike and Benedict for some questions, you mentioned, I wanted to get your thoughts on the incidents concerning the US and Iran. What do you make of the government's response? Well, Dominic Raab's response, because we haven't had a response from the Prime Minister yet. He's been on holiday.
Well, I mean, it's a pretty predictable sort of I don't know, the sort of Britain, the new poodle of the United States. Whatever Donald Trump does, the government will say, oh, we'll try and defend it. But the reality is that...
but hang on, they haven't really defended. I mean, what do you think has caused Mike Pompeo to come out and say that the EU stance and the Brits, he quoted us, has not been particularly helpful? I mean, that doesn't sound like people behaving like poodles.
Well, I suppose it's just a sort of half-hearted, neutral response, not wanting to, because obviously our European friends have come out and said it as it is, which is irresponsible action that will end up very probably with Iranian attacks on people in Europe. Because the idea that the Iranians are suddenly going to respond by launching lots of missiles at American targets when, of course, Trump has said that he's got this huge war machine that will pummel Iran and indeed attack. He's already said he would attack cultural targets as opposed to military targets and economic targets. Then obviously the response will be for targets on individuals and etc. in Europe and Americans in Europe and abroad. Mm-hmm. And who wants that? And everyone's looking over their shoulder. And this is Trump's responsibility. And it's all about distracting from the impeachment and focusing on the election next year in the United States. And it's contrary to what he professed to do, which was basically to pull out of Syria and let the Kurds die, be attacked by the Turks, having basically beaten the ISIS on our behalf. I mean, it's outrageous. And again, they're not being called out. I mean, people are saying, oh, isn't it awful, and let's de-escalate. But it's an outrageous political act that will cost European lives, in my view.
A question from Mike, Indian.
Good morning, Grant. Listening to you, I can't help but feel the sense of frustration because you're talking about hypotheticals in terms of what Brexit might look like. You're also talking about the fact that what could have been done in the last year. Let's be candid about the Labour Party in 2019. There were plenty of opportunities for Labour and the Lib Dems and the others in Parliament to propose an alternative to Brexit, and it did not happen. The election was, unfortunately, no matter what we think about the outcome, confirmatory, for the Prime Minister's policy of getting it done and a rejection, I think, of the second referendum. The numbers we're talking about haven't really moved since 2016. So I'd like to ask, what's the Labour Party's role in the next year or so? Surely it should be focusing on holding the government to account, because the new withdrawal agreement bill, because of the election, is going to have substantially fewer parliamentary provisions for parliamentary oversight in there. So in terms of what the Prime Minister should be looking to achieve in the next year or so, being realistic now, what would you like to see in terms of a trade deal?
Yeah, well, just very quickly, firstly, on what Labour, should and could have done, and basically Boris Johnson was on the ropes. And then the SNP and the Liberal Democrats decided to basically sidestep the Fixed Term Parliament Act by saying, we'll have a simple act, bringing forward an early election act. And once it became obvious that they only needed a majority of the SNP and the Tories to get that through, so people wouldn't be preoccupied with the court case against, salmon and sturgeon or whatever, they decided to go for that for the self-interest of the SNP and the Liberal Democrats. And Labour then was sort of forced to vote for an election because there was going to be an election we were bound to lose. because Boris Johnson knew that the Remain side would be split. That needn't have happened. That was just the Liberal Democrats and the SNP, but it did happen. As you say, we are where we are, even though most people voted for Remain. Most MPs are Tory, so we're in a very weak position, as you say. The government will try and minimise parliamentary scrutiny of the US bill. The most important bill, of course, the EU trading arrangements. And clearly, we've got to be, trying to get what alignment we can with workers' rights, with environmental protections, with economic alignment with the single market and the customs union as best we can, to stop the inevitable leaving of big companies who basically service the single market, or would feel they'd be better off in it than outside it. Already they were clearly seeing the motor industry is leaving, and others, like Airbus, people like this, are sort of looking to leave as well. So it's important that we do what we can to ensure our economy keeps going and our environment and our workers are protected. But as you pointed out, ultimately the Tories have got a whip hand. There is a question, of course, in terms of the strategy of whether we can coax some of the newly elected Conservative MPs to think very clearly about their position, because these are seats they've never won before. Whether they're doing the right things for their communities, because if you're the MP for Sedgefield, and you suddenly sign up for, half the people who've got jobs in manufacturing Sedgefield losing their jobs when it could have been avoided through a better trade deal, you should be asking for scrutiny. But, they may just be sort of, happy, clappy, get Brexit done, oven ready people.
A quick question for Benedict Spence.
Just very quickly, Garrett, on the subject of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general who was killed by a US drone strike.
Yeah.
If you're not in favour of him being assassinated, would you then have just been in favour of him being allowed to carry on as he was in the Middle East?
Yeah, and he's not a good man. He's done a lot of bad things. But the only options available aren't to sort of knock him off with a drone strike or just do nothing.
So what are the other options?
Well, clearly, obviously the American, or rather Donald Trump's position on Iran has been appalling, because obviously he dismantled all the good work that was done in terms of the nuclear deal that was being done with Iran, and has now done what he did with North Korea, basically threatened sort of massive force and destruction, which will mean that Iran must get a nuclear weapon.
Well, the thing is, we're getting slightly off topic. I just want to bring this back to specifically why.
I mean, what should we do?
If you're looking
are you saying he should have been killed? So
yes, absolutely. I'm just going to look at this entirely from the perspective of the US. He is responsible for the deaths in the last year of 600 serving.
Let's hear from Grant. So you disagree?
I mean, it's a madness, isn't it? Who else should they kill?
Well, they kill anybody who attacks their own citizens.
No, I'm just going the Americans kill the Ayatollahs? Are you the Telegraph's view?
I have no idea if it's the Telegraph's view. I'm not employed by the Telegraph. You'd have to ask the Daily Telegraph.
But well, I think it's going around killing people on the grounds that, obviously we need a strategic approach to this, and that was the approach that was taken prior to Trump. And Boris Johnson, of course, tried to get Trump to safeguard the Iranian, the Iranian nuclear deal. If you remember, he appeared on. Trump wouldn't see him. This was before he was
okay, but
he appeared on Fox News.
Just to make sure that in your view, Dominic Raab has been out both on Sky News today and on Andrew Marr's show, saying that the action was justified. He stopped short of whether calling it lawful or unlawful, but the action was justified because America had a right to safeguard itself, protect itself and its own citizens. You don't buy that as an excuse?
Well, we haven't seen any detail of that, have we? This is all the basis that this guy was planning to do things that he hasn't done, yeah? So,
no, they can go
around saying, I just think it was a simple political act to distract the media from Trump's impeachment, and Raab's fallen for it.
Okay. Grant Davis, as ever, thank you for your time. Grant Davis, the Labour MP for Swansea West. Benedict, you seem unsatisfied. I'm going to give you a quick last word before I go to break.
Well, simply because if you want to go down the line of saying that this was to prevent further deaths, I don't actually think you can question that this will have prevented further things that were in the works. But actually, what we're talking about here is not somebody who may have been going to kill American personnel, somebody who is responsible for the deaths of upwards of 600 US servicemen and women in the region in the last few years, and who the day before he was assassinated was responsible for an attack on the US embassy in Baghdad. That is sovereign territory. They are diplomats who are protected under international law as representatives of their government. That was a declaration of war, whether you like it or not. And actually, when you're talking about those sorts of numbers, 600 actual dead personnel, plus any number of serving diplomats working in the diplomatic quarter, I don't actually see what the issue is. Wouldn't we want something done similarly if a regime was allowed to act with impunity and was just committing itself to, because these are just the American lives we're talking about. There are literally tens of thousands, if not more, of lives who have been either taken or affected by the direct decisions of Qasem Soleimani in the Middle East region. And actually, sooner or later, you have to say, I know it's a difficult thing, because we don't want to think about it escalating and causing more deaths, but more deaths were going to happen either way if this man survived. And he has already killed with impunity before. At what point do you say, yes, it's a very difficult situation, there are no good outcomes, but we cannot, in any clear conscience, allow this person to continue in the way that he is, because that is not the humane thing to do.
Okay, I'll have to go to a break. I would love to carry on this conversation. Perhaps we will after the breaks. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need to let us know your thoughts. You can tweet us here at Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
This is Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio. With the Times and the Sunday Times. Know your times.
Greetings, peoples. Don't be like Sergei, slaving Monday to Friday, then so frazzled by weekend, you no cook Sunday lunch. You need me, Alexander, to save the day.
Oh, so Sunday lunch means meerkat meals?
Exactly. Oh. Meerkat meals. 2 for 1 on food at your favorite chain and independent restaurants. When you buy, so compare the market.
Qualifying purchase, app only, 2 for 1 on selected food, a la carte only, Sunday to Thursday, T's and C's and exclusions apply.
Hi, I'm back. I just set a personal best on my park run. Feels great.
That's lovely, Mike. I think you've earned the right to put all the bins out.
Hey?
With Vitality Life Insurance, you get properly rewarded when you're active. In fact, you could save over £730 every year in discounts and rewards from our partners. Join over 1 million customers. Just search Vitality Life. Vitality. Positively different. Annual savings available with certain plans and are dependent on members' usage of rewards available. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey,
At Morrison's, we have big brands at low prices. Like a family pack of original Quaker Oatso Simple Oats with 20 sachets for £1.75. That's better than half price. Big brands, low prices at Morrison's.
Majority of stores while stocks last. Was £4. Offer ends Sunday the 5th of January.
Nice legs, Barry. What are you doing in shorts? It's January.
Mate, haven't you heard?
Britain, Halls from £9.50 is back. Pick up your copy of The Sun and start collecting today. Oh, yeah. Terms and conditions apply. Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
In West Yorkshire, the M62 westbound at junction 26 for Chain Bar, there's a lane closed on the entry slip following an accident. And the M32 northbound in Bristol remains closed between junction 2 for Eastville and junction 1 for Hambrook for accident investigation work. The southbound side has reopened. On the M25 anti-clockwise between junction 9 for Leatherhead and junction 8 for Reigate, lane 1 is closed for emergency repairs. And on the trains of anti-West Coast, Transport for Wales and Cross Country still have no services running between Birmingham New Street and Birmingham International. I'm Michael Page.
At Costa, we know New Year's resolutions are easier said than done. Like going to the gym every day. Well, some days. Or saving money. Until those January sales. And how about going dairy-free? Well, actually, that's pretty easy, since our delicious almond, coconut and soya dairy alternatives are now free. At last, New Year's resolutions you can stick to. Visit your local Costa Coffee and discover what's new in store. T's and C's apply.
Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the last part of the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with the Times. Be well informed. With me, I have, for just a very few minutes remaining, Mike Indian, political blogger and commentator from the Groucho tendency, and Benedict Spence, freelance journalist and Tory commentator. You got quite heated there with Grant Davis. You were quite upset with the view of the Soleimani case.
Because it is childish,
But
it is self-indulgent, and I have so little time for we should just stay out and we just shouldn't do anything.
Do you accept, though, that the taking out of someone like Soleimani, someone who was tipped to be president of Iran, we're not talking about an Osama bin Laden. We're not talking about a head of a terrorist organisation.
No, we're talking about somebody who's worse. They're at the head of a nation who is a state sponsor of terror.
But it is still a sovereign nation. So taking somebody out like that, it is not, whether it's justified or not, is not the same thing as just announcing that you've just taken out al-Baghdadi or an Osama bin Laden. And also, Donald Trump has shown form in ripping up the Iran nuclear deal, in, pretty much looking to do everything he can to upset Iran, whereas he's very happy to get the photo opportunity with North Korea leader Kim Jong-un. It doesn't seem that he's extended the same, although he has said he wants to have a face-to-face with the Iranian leadership. I don't think that's going to be on the cards anymore. But do you accept the fact that I agree with you, it's a difficult call, but it was a call done by someone who's not known for having rational
if you can show me
processes and decision processes.
If you can show me where North Korean proxies are operating anywhere in the world on the same scale as Iran's are, then I'll take that argument. But ultimately, the simple fact of the matter is, Iran is the single biggest, right now, sponsor of terrorism, certainly in the region. It is responsible for far more deaths than organisations like Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State.
But it's fair to say
it is a serious danger to the region, to the to our allies in the region, and
also
but
hang on, Qasem Soleimani fought against ISIS, right?
So did Bashar al-Assad. Yeah. So did Putin. So did Al-Qaeda. So did Jabhat al-Nusra. So did literally everybody, because they were an existential threat to the region. That doesn't make it good. Stalin fought Hitler in the Second World War. Does that just wipe his slate clean? No, it absolutely does not. That's not a good argument to go down. If you've got an organisation like ISIS who are hell-bent on the destruction of everybody around them, well, then it stands to reason that everybody is going to fight back against them. That is not a reason enough to say, oh, well, we should just give Qasem Soleimani the benefit of the doubt. We need to look right now at what is happening in Syria, in Iraq, but also in Yemen, also in Lebanon, the serious domestic strife that is happening in all of these countries as a direct result of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps operating in these countries and using movements in those countries as proxies to attack countries like Saudi Arabia, like Israel, but also, as has been happening for the past few years, to attack US personnel in the region. This talk about launching, missile attacks against the US is not going to start now. As I said, 600 people are dead as a result of operations he has directed. We only care now because he is dead, but it's been happening for a very long time. But, ultimately, it goes, I know it's so difficult because it risks escalation and it risks more people dying. It's the exact same argument that lots of people had about Saddam Hussein and the Iraq War, which was appallingly prosecuted. But standing there at the brink, you look at somebody who is directly responsible for the deaths of so many people and the suffering of so many more, and who is showing absolutely no signs of abating that. What actually are you meant to do? Just keep sitting there and saying, well, it's nothing to do with us? No, you can't but
you can appreciate that quite a few people are jumpy with interventions like this. We've had Iraq, I would say in hindsight, was not a successful intervention. Yes, maybe it had, it got rid of a tyrannical ruler who was responsible for thousands of deaths in his own country.
But we didn't intervene in Syria or Libya like we did in Iraq and look at those countries. Non-intervention is almost as bad as intervention because other operatives like Iran end up moving into those countries.
And at the risk of putting up a sort of a whataboutery type of counter argument, you do have many people looking at these actions today and thinking, okay, understood, I can understand the justification behind the assassination of someone like Qasem Soleimani. What I don't understand is Saudi Arabia killing indiscriminately people in Yemen, and everybody turns a blind eye to that.
Yes.
And that's when people have the mistrust of the judgment of someone like President Trump and people like Dominic Raab, who seem to be, and other foreign ministers who seem to sort of be using mild, moderate language when, people can clearly see the injustices happening in Saudi Arabia, which nobody really talks about or is prepared to do anything about. Well, I don't see any missiles and drone attacks hitting Saudi Arabia in the protection of the Yemeni people, for example.
No, true. But this is the problem, isn't it? That we only care now about this region. We've only started caring about it now that Qasem Soleimani has been killed. There have been demonstrations. There are, I think, 1,500 people were shot in the streets of Baghdad last month by Iranian-backed militias for protesting against the government. And this has been happening in Beirut. It's been happening in Tehran itself. There is a series of unrest around the region. The Arab Spring is not over, but actually we've stopped caring about it because we don't have the same military presence that we had before. But these things do not stop happening just because you stop paying attention to them. But now all of a sudden that, an individual, a very senior individual in the Iranian regime is dead, suddenly everybody's going, oh, well, the whole situation's going to escalate. No, the region has been on fire for the last few years. Just because the Islamic State was, militarily defeated doesn't mean that the ideology behind it is gone, does not mean that these countries are now fine.
But do you not think responsible politics is you make a case for it by saying, look, as you just said, the situation has not gone away, things are getting worse, these are the problems that we have, before you all of a sudden just take a unilateral step?
We should let him know that we're coming before we do, because that's the sporting thing to do.
Well, I don't think that's a sporting thing to do, but I think you need to get people, you need to get your allies on your side before you go and do something which can potentially escalate, because Iran may take action not on US soil, but it might take it on EU soil, on UK soil. We don't know where they're going to retaliate.
Well, it did so 3 days ago. It attacked the US embassy in Baghdad. It has taken action before. It does this. And the thing is, when we talk about what the Iranian response is going to be, there's two ways of looking at that. One, you need to look at what else has been happening in the region, the fact that Israel has been flying sorties against Iran, directly against Iran for the best part of a year, over 100 missions carried out, and Iran has done nothing to strike back at Israel because it can't. You then need to look actually and say, well, if that is the sort of, that's what we're talking about. Iran has to operate via proxies, via terrorist organizations in the region. What does this action by the US say? We've already had the deaths of Baghdadi and Osama bin Laden, and that's the US saying, if you don't want to be found, we can find you and we can kill you. It might take a lot of effort, but we can do that. This is a very clear statement that says, actually, just because you are a sovereign nation, just because you are an official, let's not pretend that he's an elected official, by the way, but just because you are very senior up in a government, if you are behaving in a way, if your policies are leading to so much destruction, just because you are an official, that does not make you safe. We know that Iran is not a country that is going to engage with the international community when it comes to extraditing figures accused of war crimes. So actually, what other options are there? This is the US saying there are lines. There are red lines, which the Obama administration also set out its red line and then ignored. This is the Trump administration saying, no, we stick to our red lines and you may not like them, but the way to stop this from happening is to stop doing what you're doing in the region.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it there because we're almost late for the news. Well, actually, in fact, we are late for the news. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Mike Indian, political blogger and commentator for the Grouch tendency. Benedict Spence, I wish we talked about Iran a little bit sooner there rather than leaving it all to the end. Freelance journalist and Tory commentator, thank you very much both for your time. It's the 12 o'clock news next.
We are
Talk Radio.
The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Fancy watching a film?
Could do. What's on?
This looks good. Spiders on a train.
What's it about?
Spiders knocking about on a train.
Sometimes the name says it all. Like the Big Tasty from McDonald's, with succulent beef, cheese, sliced tomato, lettuce, onions and lashings of our Big Tasty sauce. Available with or without bacon. Served after 11 a.m. until the 28th of January. Participating restaurants only, subject to availability.
At Bath Store, enjoy up to half price on selected bathroom products. Bath Store. Feels so different. Exclusions at bathstore.com.
The deadline for filing your tax return is creeping closer, so it's time to do something about it. Make life easier with EY Tax Chat. Download the app today and connect with EY professionals to file your tax return with minimal effort and maximum confidence. There's no paper documents or complicated software. EY tax professionals prepare and submit your return from just £329. Search or download EY Tax Chat now to beat the 31st of January deadline.
The
Sunday Times presents Life Lessons, a weekend of big talks from big thinkers, bringing together some of the world's greatest minds to present a never-before-seen take on well-being. It's smart, informed and practical. Join our stellar thinkers, Alain de Botton, Bill Bryson, Darren Brown, Ruby Wax and many more for 2 days of debate, conversation and insight. Life Lessons, 15th to the 16th of February 2020 at the Barbican Centre, London. Book your tickets now at lifelessonsfestival.com.
On DAB, digital radio, online and on mobile.
This is Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio, on the hour news headlines.
I'm James Lower. Good afternoon. Iran's foreign minister says threats from Donald Trump breach international law following the killing of the country's top general. The Middle Eastern country is promising revenge after a US airstrike, whilst the American president is warning Iran that his nation spent $2 trillion on military equipment and will use it without hesitation. The UK government says war is in no one's interest. Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry agrees.
The president is reckless and hasn't thought through, I don't think, what it is that he's doing. But it seems to me quite clear that the Iranians are going to counterattack, and it means that our interests, our people, our forces are, of course, under threat.
Elsewhere, Australia's Prime Minister says that while weather conditions have improved, many wildfires are still raging. 24 people are now known to have been killed, and it's estimated 1 billion animals across the country will die. Aaron McCall has been giving up his time to help those in need in Victoria, despite falling victim to the fires himself.
It's been absolutely overwhelming. Haven't had time to think. Defended my own house in Nicholson Monday night, stayed up all night. Drove to Buchan in the morning to check out my farm. Mum and Dad's place is gone. Father-in-law's place is... parents are gone.
A report suggests the cost of the government's flagship rail project, HS2, is out of control. Lord Berkeley was the former deputy chair of a government commission panel examining the scheme's affordability and benefits. He strongly disagrees with their estimate of £88 billion and thinks it's more likely to cost £107 billion. The Department for Transport says the report represents Lord Berkeley's personal view. The shadow Brexit secretary has become the latest MP to enter the Labour leadership contest. Sir Keir Starmer will launch his bid in Stevenage later, where he's expected to urge the party to listen to voters in order to win back their trust. A total of 5 politicians are now contenders to succeed Jeremy Corbyn. And Elton John, Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt are among the presenters for this year's Golden Globe ceremony, which is being hosted by Ricky Gervais. British talent nominated this year includes Taron Egerton for Rocket Man and Phoebe Waller-Bridge for Fleabag. The ceremony, which airs overnight our time, is typically an indicator of Oscar success. So weather then, much of the UK staying dry and cloudy today. Some brighter spells for East Wales, the Midlands and eastern Scotland.
Talk Radio Sports Update.
England are back out against South Africa on the third day of the second test in Cape Town after lunch. The hosts were bowled out for 223 earlier this morning. You can listen to ball-by-ball exclusive coverage on Talk Sport 2. Elsewhere, there's 11 more third-round FA Cup games today, including the Merseyside derby at Anfield between Liverpool and Everton. One of the biggest stories of the weekend so far, though, was League One strugglers Tranmere fighting from 3-0 down to draw 3-3 with Premier League Watford to force a replay. Elsewhere, holders Manchester City eased through to the fourth round as they saw off League Two Port Vale 4-1. Manchester United and Wolves will also replay after a goalless draw at Molineux.
Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB digital radio.
Talk Politics on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Talk Politics with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with the Times. Be well informed. We're going to carry on our conversation into the Labour leadership debate. Some of your messages here I want to get to. John on Twitter says, Labour needs to completely reform, get rid of momentum and find a leader that can accept and promote a balance between capitalism and socialism before it stands a chance of being elected. Sounds like something back in the Blair years. Although, I don't know why this has happened in the language within the Labour Party. There's sort of anything to do with Blair or Blairite seems to be a sort of a dirty word. But I do forget that the man did win quite a lot of elections and by being in power managed to help quite a lot of people. But hey, Roger on YouTube says Jess Phillips is the only candidate who could give Labour a chance to get elected probably at the next election, at the election after the next one. So an admission there from Roger that the Conservatives look to be in power for the next 10 years. But a lot of things can happen within 5 years, Roger. I wouldn't be quite sure of that. Mike Indian and Benedict Spence were both quite sure that It was Boris Johnson's election to lose. I wouldn't be too quick on that. But let's speak to a former Labour MP from Bury North, James Frith. Welcome back to the show, James.
Morning, Alexis. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you as well. Thank you for joining me. And I'm sorry you lost your seat in Bury North. I remember we spoke before the election, and I remember your passion about your constituency. You mentioned the football club as well, but it is what it is. The election went that way. In hindsight, and I only asked this because I had Best for Britain's Naomi Smith here straight after the election. She said that she did warn Labour and the Lib Dems, to be fair, that calling an election and falling into that election trap by Boris Johnson was a massive mistake. She was not believed. In hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, do you think that going into that election was a massive mistake for Labour?
That's a good question. I know Naomi, and she talks a lot of sense. I don't think it was something we could have avoided for any longer, is probably my answer on that. I actually voted for it in the end because I think if it's going that way, I wanted to come back to the constituency and say I'm ready to be held to account and seek permission to be the MP again. Now, we fell short. Ultimately, the headwinds were too strong for us to head off. We won in 2017 with a sort of tidal impact from the electorate, and that tidal impact took us under this time. So it's a brutal business, but you go into it with your eyes wide open. We're now in the most marginal seat in the country. I am not fair weather, and so I'm not just packing up and leaving politics by any means. These activism is in my blood, and I'm very interested in this process of renewal and rebuilding that the Labour Party is now in once again, though I'm getting pretty sick and tired of Labour losing elections and reset, rebuild, listening exercises.
Well, before we talk about the future, let's look at the past a little bit. Both Labour leader hopefuls Jess Phillips and Sir Keir Starmer were on BBC's Andrew Marr this morning. A word that kept coming up from both of them was trust. The Labour Party had lost the trust of the Labour electorate to deliver on what was a stonkingly huge manifesto, which seemed to be overloaded with promises from free broadband to nationalisation to money for waspy women. There was money, 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 money everywhere. There was the grey book that costed everything, to be fair. But in your view, and looking at the fact that Bury North turned blue, what was it that prevented your constituents from voting Labour and, perhaps to use Boris Johnson's words, lent their Labour votes to Conservatives?
Again, I think that's on the money, really. I think another word for trust is belief. And I think whilst the manifesto outlined policies that the Labour Party believed is what the country needs, it ultimately was not believed by the country. And so telling people that you can have everything for nothing or everything for free, particularly those without as much as they would like, people that are trying to make ends meet know the cost of things. They know the value of things because they know as much as what they can't afford as what they can afford. And so to present a manifesto that felt overlong, it was described to me by a voter as a Christmas wish list, given the winter election we were in. And I think that's a fair summary. And if people don't believe in what you are saying, and of course that's why I think trust is the word that so many of the candidates are using, then they aren't going to put their faith in the government and the agenda that you're proposing.
But James, didn't the other side have an equal problem? And yet the other side tended to be believed. Boris Johnson has pledged billions of pounds to be spent up in the constituencies that used to form the famous Labour Red Wall. I think it's upwards of £90 billion. He also promised that he can do all this without raising any taxes. No raise on VAT, no raise on income tax, no raise on business tax, corporation tax, should I say, and also guaranteeing the triple lock on pensions. I mean, that's also a sort of a Christmas wish list. So why were they believed and you weren't?
Well, again, I come back to what voters have told me time and time again. One lady in particular said to me when in answer to my question back to her about the two leaders of the parties, Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson, she didn't believe either of them, but in her words, she believed Boris enough.
Right.
And I think this is the state of British politics as it's become, very sadly, that people start with a general view of disbelief and then consider, again, in the same lady's words, the lesser of the two evils, to quote her directly. And so where I am at now is interpreting that vision, interpreting that feedback, and making sure that the leadership candidates visit Bury North and hear from these voters themselves in what I've called the marginal seat test.
Now, you have, yes, I was going to come to that. You have sort of challenged the prospective leaders to say, look, if you can come and win the people over in Bury North, then you stand a good chance of perhaps you're the right candidate. So let me ask you, there's a few things we've been asking our listeners, where should Labour look for, what should Labour look for in a new Labour leader? A lot of people coming back with, for example, the next Labour leader should be a woman. The next Labour leader should be outside the London, outside the M25. How important are those things to you? Do you think that somebody who is from the North or somebody who is, the Labour Party has yet to have a female leader, are those the most important qualities for a next Labour leader?
I don't think they're the most important qualities, no. I think they are factors in any decision-making that members and then subsequently the electorate would make. But, the idea that the North is waiting for a Northerner in order to vote Labour is patronising at best, really. And certainly no one was on the doorstep saying to me the problem was the geography or the location of the leader or indeed the policies or the origins for those policies. What we need is credibility, and what we need also is a process of renewal that doesn't speak only to soundproof constituencies where Labour votes are weighed rather than counted, and we sort of sit around congratulating ourselves on a really enlightened manifesto, only for it to be then to then fail when put up against the hopes, ambitions, demands of an electorate. And in a marginal seat, Alexis, that is all too present in every conversation at any given point in life here. And when you're representing that town or one of these towns' marginal seats in Parliament, that is on your shoulders, that is in your ear the entire time. And I think we were guilty, and have been guilty not just in this election, of talking to ourselves, congratulating ourselves on policies that we believe to be the right ones, without understanding the concerns, the realities, the anxieties of the electorate. And if we present them with a big long list of stuff that in isolation they find no problem with, the principal ideas, but if they then say, well, how are you doing all of this so soon? And one person said to me, this is a 50-year plan, not achievable in one term of office. And so, this is a bit of a challenge for my own party in terms of how we select our leader. The NEC meets this week. I would expect, of course, all candidates to tour the country. But I do think it's important that the marginal seat aspect, where voters who have voted Conservative this time need to vote Labour next time if the credible leadership candidate thinks that he or she can win the country back. There are some within the Labour movement, and indeed within the parliamentary Labour Party, who winning a Tory voter round is sort of somehow an unworthy pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
I stood on doorsteps deliberately speaking to Conservative voters, asking them to put their faith in me in both 2017 and 2019, and on evidence of both results, actually, even in 2019, on evidence of both results, we definitely had former Conservative voters voting Labour and voting for me here. But that wasn't the case across the country, and it wasn't enough in Bury North.
So in your view, in choosing the next Labour leader, what do you think is more important? Do you think it's finding the right leader to bring the party together? I have to tell you that the majority of the messages that I'm getting on the radio station at the moment involve momentum, and a lot of Labour supporters saying momentum, Labour Party needs to get rid of momentum, which I don't even know if that's possible. But do you think that there is... The strategy should be to find a leader who can bring the party together, who can stop this infighting of whether some candidates are Blairites or some candidates are Corbynites, to end that discussion? Or is it finding the right candidate as a foil, as someone to put up against Boris Johnson every Wednesday at PMQs? Which is more important?
Oh, I think you have to have a combination of that. I mean,
Okay.
let me just address head on the idea that bits or aspects or factions or wings or areas of our party need to be kind of banished. I don't believe that. I've met and worked with a great number of people from across our party movement. The momentum in Bury is full of very, very good people. There are a lot of people in the Labour Party that I have strong disagreements with. There are a lot of people in momentum also. This idea that we kind of apply purity tests to certain bits of a party in our movement, it really is missing the challenge in front of us, which is to speak with one voice, with single purpose to get back into government and get the trust and the faith and belief of the country that we have a better option for them and their lives than the woeful mis-selling of Boris Johnson. So, yes, it's about taking Johnson to task. Yes, it's about exposing his lies and the myths that he peddles, not least the idea that getting Brexit done is simply a case of passing a date on the calendar, when actually we'll be possibly 5 to 10 years just getting back to where we are now in terms of economic and trade status. And so, yes, it is about taking on and being an opposition, Her Majesty's opposition. But as I like to say, it is about being Her Majesty's alternative government as well. So you do have to begin to outline a vision, outline policy, outline intent, and bring people with you. And that has to involve a degree of excitement as well, Alexis. The possibilities of what government can do with and for its people. We seem to have lost this. And kind of comparing this period of history, comparing where we are now to a period of history, I don't believe it's a 1945 moment. But I think if you look at the government of the 70s under Harold Wilson, how he seized the capacity of an active state, of a government with the white heat of technology. And this is really where we're at, to get people excited about what we can do. People have given up, I feel, in what politics can do to improve everyday life in their towns. And really reconnecting that is so important. It's so important to politics, actually, even more importantly than one single party. Restoring people's faith in politics as a force for change for good, as opposed to just a petition or an objection, is a really important pursuit for me, and it's why I'm staying as active as I am.
So, you know what's coming next? I am going to ask you whether or not any of the candidates that have been put forward so far. And I am going to include Rebecca Long-Bailey in that list, because even though she hasn't announced, we all know that she will. She is very likely to announce a bid to become leader of the Labour Party. So far, is there anybody that you feel is that right candidate, as you said, to not only be Her Majesty's opposition, but also to be a credible alternative government?
Look, we're too early into the process, and I said yesterday, we hosted Jess Phillips yesterday as the first of the leadership candidates to come. All of the candidates to date have, or the majority of candidates to date for the leadership have confirmed that they're going to come to Bury North and sort of apply their effort to the marginal seat test that I've outlined. My job as a former MP, as a candidate at the last election, but also as an advocate for marginal seats, is to give this leadership race a shot in the arm on electability and electoral credibility. And that is about what we say to our members, of course, who will be voting primarily for the leader of their party, or first, rather, the leader of their party, but actually asking us all to consider who is the next Labour Prime Minister in this race. And so I'm kind of adopting a kind of chair capacity to that at the moment. Of course,
you call it chair capacity, James. I call it sitting on the fence, not answering my question.
Well, I think as somebody whose job it is to look both ways and answer questions, and as yourself, Alexis, you'll respect my independence at this early stage.
Okay, at this early stage, I'll give you that. But in a late stage, I would like to see an answer to that question. Listen,
Sure.
James.
Why don't I come back on it? Why don't I come back on and tell you when we're at a timely moment in the campaign?
A timely moment. Absolutely. Look, James, always appreciate your time. Again, sorry that you didn't manage to win your seat but maintain your seat. But it's nice to hear that you are continuing to work, be passionate as you always have been when I've spoken to you. So thank you for giving me your time, and I look forward to speaking to you very soon. That's James Frith, former MP for Bury North, and someone who actually seems to be sort of laying down the gauntlet for future Labour candidates, saying, well, come up here, it's a marginal seat, come up here and have a go, because you need to win seats like this, as we heard from Mike Indian earlier. Somewhere in the region of 100 and, well, there's been sort of now a little bit of the maths have gone because Grant Davis spun a different number at us, but somewhere between 125 and 132 seats are needed for Labour to win back 125 to 132 seats. They need to win back in order to get a majority of one. I mean, there's a huge mountain to climb for Labour right now. And who is the best person for the job? Aidan on Twitter said, a magician. I don't think so. I think they've quite got the hang of this, Aidan, but I get what you mean. They do almost need a miracle, or they certainly need a very, very big change. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need to let me know your thoughts on who you think should be the next Labour leader. Or you can carry on sending your messages to Talk Radio. And talkradio.co.uk as well. We'll take a quick break. We'll be straight back after this.
Talk Radio.
Contact Talk Radio. Call 0344 499 1000. Text Talk and your message to 87222. Texts cost 25 pence plus your standard network rate. Or you can tweet us at Talk Radio.
This is Talk Radio.
The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
This is the sound of confidence being made in the British Army. Did you pick it out? Behind the wind. Behind the panic. To that. Right there. The sound of a reserve soldier gripping someone's hand during a hurricane relief mission. Going far beyond their day job. The sound of confidence that lasts a lifetime being made. Find where you belong. Search Army Reserve.
Everyone knows it pays to shop around to save money on your energy deal. But who has the time? If only there was a website that did all the hard work for you, year after year. Well, there is. It's called switchcraft.co.uk. They find you better energy deals and automatically switch you every time your plan ends, helping customers save an average of £219 a year on energy bills. Best of all, it's totally free. Switchcraft.co.uk. The one-stop, no-hassle route to cheaper energy. Start saving now at switchcraft.co.uk/radio. Switching made smarter.
It's BT's best ever January sale. Why? Because our superfast fibre price has never ever been lower, because you're getting seriously powerful Wi-Fi, and because our smart hub has a which best sorted. Search BT Broadband.
CPI increase each March starting 2020. New customers was £29.99 per month over 24 months, £32.99 per month, 25 terms apply.
At Dreams, there's only 3 days left to save up to a massive 60% in our biggest ever price drop. Hurry! Price drop ends Tuesday at Dreams.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
Good news to start. The M32 northbound in Bristol has reopened following the earlier accident investigation work between Junction 2 for Eastville and Junction 1 for Hambrook. In Hampshire on the M3 southbound at Junction 9 for Winchester North, there's a broken down vehicle blocking a lane on the entry slip. In London, the M25 anti-clockwise between Junction 25 for Enfield and 24 for Potters Bar. Lane 1 is closed because of a breakdown. And in West Yorkshire on the M62 westbound at Junction 26 for Chain Bar, there's an accident. That means there's a lane closed on the entry slip. I'm Michael Page.
I'm Captain Obvious, and every day people book trips on Hotels.com that you will later hate like. A hate like is when you like Becky's picture of another waterfall even though you kind of hate it because she's there and you're on the train next to a mouth breather. Don't hate like Becky's trip. Book your own with Hotels.com. Hotels.com. Be there, do that.
Outspoken opinions and decisive debate. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Talk Politics with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with the Times. Know your times. We've been asking the question of who do you think the next Labour leader should be, or what sort of leader does Labour need? Keep your answers coming on at Talk Radio, or you can give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number that you need. It'd be lovely to get your thoughts. But before that, just want to have a little conversation about, well, we talked about it earlier with Benedict Spence about Iran and the situation we find ourselves in at the moment. The Prime Minister has not really said much because he's been away on holiday, although I am informed that he is back today. Surely we're going to be getting a statement from him at some point this week, although the Foreign Secretary has been doing the rounds today. The Foreign Secretary this morning stopped short of calling the killing of Soleimani as lawful or unlawful, but he did make the point that the US have the right to defend themselves and their citizens wherever they are in the world. It is fair to say that apart from Israel, it has been largely a condemned decision, the Donald Trump's decision to assassinate, effectively take out the Iran's number two, somebody who was thought of as a prospective president, future president of the country. And Mike Pompeo, citing Europeans and the Brits, have said that their comments have not been as helpful. I guess if you're going to go and do something like that without informing your allies, don't be surprised if they are taken aback, perhaps. But now the question becomes, and what everybody is trying to ascertain, is what happens next. Iran has vowed to take some sort of revenge, but what does that look like? Does that look like, are we going to be seeing terrorist attacks on US citizens or perhaps European citizens? Are we going to be looking at some sort of escalation of war, the Strait of Hormuz, where the oil tankers need to go through? Again, we've had incidents there before. We have sent ships now to guard our oil ships going in and out. The price of oil rose by 4%. That means that the markets are expecting a certain disruption in the oil supply if there are problems in the region. But actually, one thing that Iran have been very good at is hacking. And in fact, Iran is expected to deploy its hackers, which are deemed by Britain's intelligence services to be in the, quote, Champions League of cyber warfare. Now, joining me on the line is Robert Pritchard, Director of the Cybersecurity, an expert in cybersecurity as well. Robert, welcome to the show.
Hi.
How worried should the UK be of any sort of cyber attack coming from Iranian hackers?
I mean, I think it needs to be put in context in that, the Iranians have a track record of hacking for a variety of means, including deliberately to cause disruption. Mm-hmm. But it's important to note that, probably most lay people don't know what's happened. So it's not like their previous activity have caused disasters or headlines around the world. So people are worrying about it more now, but it's the kind of activity that the NCSC and GCHQ are worried about all of the time, and which critical infrastructure in the UK should be pretty well prepared for.
And am I right in thinking that they have taken some action before the Iranian hackers? I remember, in fact, there was a documentary, I believe it was made by Alex Gibney, and it was about the Stuxnet virus, the sort of the hacking, if you like, of the Iranian nuclear program. Without going into too much detail, because I'm afraid I'm going to get lost into all that. But as retaliation, hackers managed to shut down major banks in the US. They managed to cause some serious trouble. So they do have that capability. It's not just sort of a it's not amateur hour, is what I'm trying to say.
It's not amateur hour, but shut down is a stretch, definitely. They launched denial of service attacks against banking websites of the UK, right. So it interfered with customers' abilities to log into the banks. But that's it. There was no other impact on the banks at all. They weren't compromised in any way. So they're certainly capable, but it relies on, all hacking relies on people having poor security. Mm-hmm. And not being prepared to respond. So there's no, I think the kinds of things that I think people are worried about are going to be kinetic responses rather than hacking. I'm sure they probably will try some sort of hacking stuff in retaliation, but that's not new. And there have been targeted attacks against the Saudi Aramco in which is a Saudi Arabian oil company, and things like that in the past, which have had an impact, but it's been relatively minor. And that's the problem, if you're prepared for these kinds of things, then actually, hopefully, the impact is pretty minor and businesses can keep on functioning. And at the moment, there's lots of businesses going, there are companies going out of business at the moment because of criminal ransomware. So it's hard to know really if we'd notice, particularly if Iran suddenly started doing anything particularly aggressive. It might just blend into the noise.
But what if they start... at the moment you're talking about attacks on companies. We talked about banks, for example. But what if they started looking more into our infrastructure? So, for example, attacks on power networks, attacks on rail networks, things like that. That will certainly make us notice.
It would, if it's feasible. These things aren't... People haven't been sitting around on their hands not doing anything for 20 years. The UK has had a critical section focused on cyber since the late 90s. Uh-huh. So this isn't a new threat. It isn't... it's like, just because somebody threatens cyber attack, there's not really any action you can take, because the vulnerabilities that exist could be exploited by anybody. So you can't afford to relax your game at any point. So there's, I don't know that there's much anybody will be doing differently today over what they would have done any day of the week. The preparations have been done. There may be vulnerabilities. I would be surprised if they were able to pull off anything particularly spectacular, certainly in the UK. But you may see isolated disruption if they compromise networks and use some of the techniques they've used previously. But whilst they're sophisticated, I don't know that they've necessarily demonstrated the capability to take down infrastructure. And even if you've demonstrated it, that's the thing with hacking. It's not like a missile, which is a reusable technique. If they've demonstrated a capability in the past, GCHQ will have been all over it and promulgating that information out to the critical infrastructure to make sure they're defended. Once you've used a capability, it gets much harder to use it again because people will defend against it.
Now, we haven't, although you're right, we haven't seen any capable attacks on major infrastructure like that. Is that the way we are going when it comes to conflict? A smaller country like Iran, although I don't have the number in front of me, but they do have a rather large army. we are seeing the future of conflict move beyond traditional warfare onto cyber warfare. Would you say that that's correct? That still stands, even though, as you mentioned earlier, we haven't seen any of those big successful infrastructure attacks?
It's a highly debatable topic, and my opinion is no. When people get I can't even think of the right metaphor. When things get really heated, it's kinetic warfare that people are going to worry about. We're not concerned about North Korea's cyber capability, despite the fact they're capable hackers. It's their nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't a massive deal to stop Iran developing cyber abilities. It was to stop their nuclear weapons program. So it's definitely, we're concerned about Turkey buying the SA-400s or whatever they are, the air defense from Moscow. So I think you'll see periphery, you'll see hacking. I think hacking is better. Cyber attacks are useful as force projection for countries that don't necessarily have the ability to do it in other manners in the build-up to conflict. So if they want to be an irritation or a thorn in the side of larger countries, it's quite a useful technique. But as soon as you go to actual conflict, I think cruise missiles and stealth aircraft are the things that are where people go and troops on the ground.
But Robert, do you think, and I'm sorry to harp on about it, but because it's a very interesting view, because I think a lot of people might take a different view and say, well, that's where the future is at. But do you think that maybe people are not as concerned about it, as you mentioned, than cruise missiles or nuclear missiles, because we haven't actually experienced someone, I don't know, shutting down our power network, someone causing a nuclear reactor to overheat and melt down, which is incidentally what that film was all about, in trying to disseminate the nuclear program in Iran. But let's say something like that did happen, that would change our attitude, surely.
But it probably isn't possible. That's the thing. So what actually happened against the Iranian was it was a targeted attack against the centrifuges used to enrich uranium, not nuclear power plants. So, I mean, the things you've described are sort of at the very edge of plausibility. Our power networks are not one homogeneous, hackable thing. We've seen Russian targeted attacks against power distribution networks in the Ukraine and successfully disrupting power, but it was mitigated pretty quickly and quite localized effects as well. Mm-hmm. And again, we could learn from what went wrong. They exploited poor security at the power distribution plants. What you're saying is possibly plausible, but I don't think it's very viable at the moment. Our nuclear power stations, I don't know when the UK last built a nuclear power station, but it was a very long time ago. So they're probably not really connected to anything. And these are places that take security seriously, that work with the National Cybersecurity Centre. I think this idea that I see no evidence that the idea that cyber warfare
maybe not specifically on who, but what sort of leader does Labour need to focus on in order to regroup and, remember, try and win back in the region of 130 seats in the next general election in order to have a tiny majority? They seem to have a very long way to go. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need, or you could tweet us at Talk Radio.
On DAB, digital radio, online and on mobile.
We are Talk Radio.
The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Hey, it's me again, the TV. Since my family gave me Now TV, there's no more endlessly searching for something they want to watch, because now I don't do filler TV, just killer TV. If my family want movies, I've got blockbusters. Football, how about the Premier League? Or crime dramas, I've got loads. And they're never going to guess who did it. Now they can watch whatever they're in the mood for.
What's your TV got for you tonight? Now TV. 18 plus, month passes auto-renew, terms apply.
Fill the trolley for less at Asda with Slim Fast Strawberry Shake. Was £7.25, now only £4.97. And a 4-pack of Activia fat-free yogurts was £2, now just 95p. Big brands, small prices. Don't compromise. Asda, save money, live better. Selected stores online, subject to availability. Shake 438 grams, yogurt 120 grams each.
Having to deal with financial stuff can make you feel
But at Money Supermarket, we make you feel, That's because we go further to help you get money car. We don't just compare. We cut prices to help you get better car insurance deals. Get money car. Money Supermarket.
At Bath Store, enjoy up to half price on selected bathroom products. Bath Store. Feels so different. Exclusions at bathstore.com.
Nice legs, Barry. What are you doing in shorts? It's January.
Mate, haven't you heard?
Britain, Halls from £9.50 is back. Pick up your copy of The Sun and start collecting today. Oh yeah! Terms and conditions apply.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
On the M25 clockwise in Berkshire between junction 15 for the M4 and 16 for the M40, there's a lane 1 closure for a car to have a tyre changed. Also on the M25 anti-clockwise between junction 25 for Enfield and 24 for Potters Bar, there are delays following an earlier broken down vehicle. In Suffolk at Leavenheath, the A134 is closed both ways because of an accident near to Plough Lane. And on the trains, there's better news. Avanti West Coast Cross Country Transport for Wales all returned to normal following an earlier incident at Birmingham. I'm Michael Page.
I'm Captain Obvious, and every day people book trips on Hotels.com that you will later hate like. A hate like is when you like Becky's picture of another waterfall even though you kind of hate it because she's there and you're on the train next to a mouth breather. Don't hate like Becky's trip. Book your own with Hotels.com. Hotels.com. Be there, do that.
Talk Radio. Outspoken opinions and decisive debate. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the last part of the show before 1 o'clock, where Jamie East will take over, but he'll be in shortly to tell us what's coming up on his show. But before that, let's speak to Conrad from Oxford. Conrad, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I'd like to say I think it's important that there is someone sensible leading the Labour Party, and my vote would be for Keir Starmer.
Okay.
I think it's important to have a strong opposition to challenge Conservative ideas. I say that as a Conservative Party member, actually. I do feel it's important. I wouldn't want to think that we would get all our thoughts through without someone challenging them where appropriate. In fact, I used to be a Labour supporter back in the day of John Smith, and when he died, it brought a tear to my eye back at that particular time. But I'd say my views have changed, and you see people like Jess Phillips and Rebecca Long-Bailey who rant rather than make a sensible point. And just because you have a certain accent or you're from a certain place or you've got a certain sex, I think it's important that people, choose wisely. And I think Keir Starmer would be the one that I would say is the one that comes across with sense. I don't necessarily agree with his the view he took on the Remain as opposed to Leave in respect to Brexit, but I think he's the only one who actually comes across as someone who is plausible, and I think he would be the one I would choose if I were them.
Now, it's very valiant of you to be able to put yourself in their shoes, but do you think that Keir Starmer can bring both factions of the Labour Party together, whereas the Conservatives had the Eurosceptic faction and the non-Eurosceptic faction to put together? Labour have got a different problem now because they've got the Corbynist faction of the party and the rest of the party, which said, well, we tried the Corbynism for 2 general elections, that failed, so we need to do something new. Do you think Keir Starmer has been blighted in that contest because he has been very, very close? He's been on the front bench. He was in charge of Brexit. Do you think he's the right person to bring the Labour Party back together?
I think it's a very good question. If you go back to the days of the Socialist Workers' Party, which used to be sort of momentum at the time. I used to be, back in the day, I was an engineer, and I worked on a nationalised industry called British Rail. Mm-hmm. And in those days, if you voted and didn't vote with the, should we say, with the Scottish steward, you'd be blackballed. And you would have people outside the works who had nothing to do with British Rail who would actually try and stop you going into work, saying to you, you're a blackleg, etc., etc. They didn't actually say that to me, but they would say these to people. And there was a fear factor. So what you had similar types of things to Momentum, as Momentum is now. Now, Momentum have a view. It's an extreme view, in my view. And I think your point in respect to Keir Starmer is, I'm not sure where Labour's going to go. Mm-hmm. I think it is important to have a sensible alternative to challenge the Conservatives. But it's a great question. I think, Keir Starmer, he'll take half of the party with him, And if people have got half a brain, they'll actually follow him, I would suggest. But some of the other people, if you put those in charge, could you imagine certain people being the head of the government, head of this country's government? I can't see it. Keir would be the only one, that, in my opinion. But I think from what you're saying, and I would agree with that, I think it's going to be very, very difficult because the Labour Party have basically sent themselves along a certain path, and as a party, they are, should we say, which way do they go? Do they go left or do they go right? And, Blair brought them back into the centre, and they were, should we say, a lot of success under Blair. I wasn't a big fan of Blair myself. As I say, I was more of a John Smith type of person. But I don't really know the answer to the question. But my thoughts would be, I think we've got to sort of look at themselves and say, hang on, why did we lose the election in the way we did? I knocked on some doors. I did some canvassing and knocked on doors. And what I heard from people was, can't vote for that chap, this being Corbyn. My dad was a miner. I heard this from a number of people. My dad was a miner. I voted Labour all my life, but I just cannot vote for that particular person. So,
and did they give you a reason for it?
They were basically saying, what for Corbyn? Well, the problem we've got with Jeremy Corbyn is that, unfortunately, the view of a lot of people is that he's not really at one with the nation. He's not really, should we say, proud to be British. He's always apologising for things in the past, things that have been said, things that have happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. And we need to move on. As a nation, you can look at Brexit and you can look at people leaving and people remaining. However, ultimately, there was a vote. People chose to go a certain way. A lot of people tried to stop that vote, and now we've gone. Brexit will happen at the end of the month. But if you're looking at Corbyn, for example, what they said with Jeremy Corbyn was they didn't trust him. I think trust was the major thing with him. He says one thing and does another.
But what strikes me as odd, though, in that conversation, Conrad, is that people trust Boris Johnson. I mean, we're talking about someone who's been fired twice for lying. We're talking about someone who, throughout his campaign, told so many porcupines it was hard, people lost track of it. And when you're talking about someone who understands the country, do you really think that someone who calls 250 grand a year chicken feed, the fee he was paid by the Telegraph, is that really someone, an Eton, educated Bullingdon Club, is that really someone who connects with the country?
Well, he has. I think if you look at the Telegraph, they have these cartoons by a chap called Matt.
Yeah.
And he had this Bullingdon, I think it's Bullingdon twinned with Grimsby.
Yeah.
And what actually helped him was that his mayorship when he was in charge in London.
Yeah.
He has made up profiles without a shadow of a doubt. And some people call him a buffoon, some people call him, think of him as the Messiah. But he's actually gone into a party that was very, the question around Brexit and EU membership is more or less, it nearly split the party. And, if you look at what's happened, and you're quite right, a lot of people don't trust him as, I think it was the lesser of two evils, but a lot of people are very fond of him. He's very, very, he falls into two camps, and it's like Marmite, you like him or you don't like him.
Well, even for people who disagree with him, that they sort of give him a free ride because of his charm, because of his wit. It is very disarming. And for him to win 2 elections in a very liberal, some might, kind of Labour-held London, you can't take that away from him. That was his achievement. But let me ask you, as a Conservative voter and as a Conservative supporter, what kind of Prime Minister do you think Boris Johnson is going to be? Because I'm willing to throw his first 100 days out the window, because I think I think the Prime Minister we've seen so far has been purely leading up to this election. He said the things that he knew people needed to hear in order to win this election. The election is won now. He's got a very comfortable majority, which means he can be his own man. What kind of Prime Minister will he be? Will he be this one nation Tory? Or do you think he's going to continue down the lines of this Trumpian, no one likes us, we don't care, we're going to suspend Parliament if we want to, even though it's unlawful, we're not going to apologise for anything, we're going to do what we want?
I think if you look at what he did in comparing to Theresa May when she went for the snap election, he just basically wouldn't answer the questions that he didn't want to answer. And she made various points, and the holes were picked in that. Now, that's the problem that the Labour Party went down. They promised all sorts of things, and they were therefore taken to task, where he just completely wouldn't go on to certain things, certain television programmes and certain radio programmes, said what he wanted to say, and just kept to that particular line. And people, I think, talking about the previous 100 days, etc., and going forward, one has to hope and that he basically does what he did in London, which, he basically listened to people, he put more police on the streets, He basically, he's brought the party together. Now, as I say, I don't know the chap. one of my brother-in-laws actually went to the same school as he went at one particular time. They studied the same classics at Oxford. But if you're looking at as I say, at Boris as a person, there's definitely flaws there, without a shadow of a doubt. He's said things in the past and been taken to task for it. But I would say the majority of people have done something in the past that they regret. Now, the problem we have nowadays compared to previous days is that if you say something or seem to do something, it's on camera, you can't deny it. In the past, it wouldn't have happened. Going back to your thoughts about him being the Prime Minister, one has to be hopeful that we can get through Brexit and move forward. I work in engineering. I've seen repeatedly that people are putting on hold investments because as an individual, they're not willing to take the risk. In 2008, when people took the risk and bought that extra house or bought that extra car or invested in this, when the economy went down, it basically took something down. So these people, rather than invest, would stay as they are, and the country's been in a form of limbo.
And do you think that past January 31st, or in this transition period after January 31st to the end of December 2020, do you think that confidence will be restored? Do you think, because let's not forget, by putting the exit date into law at the end of this year, this whole idea of no deal has come back. It's still possible that we leave without a negotiated deal.
It's very true. And I think that has to be on the table. It's like, and people in the past, the Remain side, have said, you take that off the table. But you know as well as I do, if you want to do any negotiation, you have to be able to walk away. Now, to take that away from the government, which was what was done, put this country in a very weak position. We should be proud to hold our head high. We are a great nation. If you look in the past, and people don't like, in World War II, we stepped up and we fought in Europe against the evil.
Sure, but we're talking about different times, Conrad, and also we're talking about different situations. It's not a war situation. We're not at war. Brexit was meant to be better than what we had before, and I still don't understand in the Brexit debate how, on our own, as a country of 66 million, however many we are going to sit across the negotiating table with a United States of America, 400 million people, a China, billions of people, a EU, 500 million people. We're going to sit opposite the table to negotiate, and we are going to get a better deal. The big powers are the EU, the largest trading bloc in the world, the US and China. And as a smaller player, you have less leverage. That's just a fact. And I just don't see how it will benefit us.
I think that is a fact. But if you're looking at the EU, for example, we actually give more than we receive. If you look at the balance of payments, we actually...
Well, I think again, I wouldn't want to open up that box, because you and I will disagree, and I think you can see it, and, we can cherry-pick facts how we want. It's done now. We're leaving, and no one can deny that. But my question to you briefly, because I've got to let it go, so I've got to let Jamie East come on the radio station, but as someone who works in engineering...
Yes.
Do you think that, because you've said that you have witnessed yourself this lack of confidence in investing, do you think that is all that money is now going to be unleashed come the 31st of January when we have officially left?
I think, I can say that the position that I see is the government, if you look at the engineering, if you look in Coventry, for example, we've got the manufacturing training centre, which is state-of-the-art, and we are, as a nation, we do an awful lot. Unfortunately, not yourselves, but certain, the BBC, for example, do not trumpet the success of the country. We are in a far better position. I get daily feed on how the country's performing, etc., etc. We do, we're doing very well despite the situation as is. Not everything will happen overnight, but I do feel it's confidence. We should be proud to move forward. Brexit should perhaps never have happened. If the EU had conceded certain things to David Cameron, perhaps we wouldn't be in the position that we're in. But going forward, I do feel we are in a stronger position than we have been for the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Conrad, thank you very much. I enjoyed that conversation immensely. That's Conrad there from Oxford, a Conservative Party member who feels that Keir Starmer would be the best choice for the Labour Party, because he will be able to present a credible alternative to Boris Johnson, which he thinks it's important to have a credible opposition. And also, one gets the feeling, because of Keir Starmer's background, as a lawyer, although Emily Thornberry was also a former lawyer, but he will have that forensic ability to hold Boris Johnson to account, which is what is needed. at the time. A few more of your messages. This has not got a name on it. Tim on Twitter, he says, one that doesn't stay on asking who should be the next Labour leader. One that doesn't stay on holiday while there's a major international crisis. Oh, wait. Oh, I see what you've done there. That's Boris Johnson. He is coming back today. Talk Radio here. Mr. Blue says, it's a matter of who is the least bad candidate. Anyone with any talent has left the party. I was a Labour member, but could see the hopelessness of the party steered by far-left momentum, totally unelectable into the future. Momentum keeps coming up again and again in your messages. I feel that the battle will be between the sort of Corbyn faction, including Momentum, and those who feel that the Corbyn experiment was tried and tested and failed, and therefore we should move on. Now, all the bumping that you can hear in the studio. Steady on.
Sorry.
Jamie East is here with a T-shirt saying, "You want my love. I want your love." Your T-shirt
always.
Says. You have my love, as always.
Thank you, darling. Validation is all we need. You know, we are but egotistical broadcasters.
40 seconds, what's coming up?
We've got Jay Glennie popping in to talk about, he's got a great new book about The Deer Hunter, the film The Deer Hunter, that he's done in collaboration with Robert De Niro.
Excellent.
We've got the usual Mick Wall, we've got Elliot Gonzalez popping in, we've got Ian Nathan telling us what we've got coming up in a year of superhero movies, the usual mix of culture, of movies, of film, of music.
And what have you been watching? 10 seconds?
I literally just finished the second season of Succession yesterday.
It's just
my goodness,
the best thing in the world.
Oh my! Are you team Shiv or are you team Kendall?
Team Kendall.
Oh,
Go till Team Kendall. That's all from us. It's Jamie East coming up after the 1 o'clock news.
We are Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
The deadline for filing your tax return is creeping closer, so it's time to do something about it. Make life easier with EY Tax Chat. Download the app today and connect with EY professionals to file your tax return with